I am stranded on a floating island with nothing more than a single tree and the void below. And the only way to escape is to make the Stargate, but it won't be easy. Gregtech, Create, realistic chemistry, dangerous machineries, and endless crafting trees stand between me and freedom. We'll need to spend hundreds of hours in Minecraft's Most Addicting Modpack in order to beat it, and the entire time we'll be hoarding strange ingots and chemicals, so we're gonna need a storage solution that can handle it. Today, we're rushing through the entire early game to unlock the power of applied energistics. Now, normally in Minecraft, you just go mining for 10 minutes and then you've got gold. But here we've got nothing but a tree and some grass. So how in the world do we go from this to this? Well, chopping trees is still the start, and expanding the island so we'd have room to catch more saplings and build machines. Immediately though, our start's different to the old version of the pack because we no longer have to sieve dirt for stone. Instead, we can just explode it out of the grass in infinite quantities. The true clicker game experience. So here we are, the typical one tree skyblock start. Crooking leaves for worms, using worms for string, using string for a bed, and making our first sieves. Our first sieving target is gravel, which we can actually make by destroying cobblestone with cobblestone. We make a cobblestone hammer and can use that to crush cobblestone into gravel, and running gravel through a sieve unlocks the first ores of the game, most importantly, iron. With iron unlocked, we actually have access to the Create mod, meaning we can start pulling off some useful automation. Most importantly, cobblestone. But cobblegens need lava, which actually first needs water, and that we can get from extracting the juices out of leftover saplings inside of an oak crucible. But that takes a while, so in the meantime, I clicked in some more cobblestone and andesite, but hammered the cobblestone all the way down into dust, which left just enough time for the water to ooze out of the baby trees. And in my overexcitement, instead of making an infinite source of water, I used one of the sources to convert a single dust into a single clay block, and then I had to wait all over again for another source block in order to actually get the infinite water. You might wonder to yourself why we need clay for lava, and don't worry, it'll make sense soon, but first, we really need bone meal, which we can only get from composting saplings. Did I mention I was playing in peaceful mode? Also, it turns out you need a ton of saplings for just one single bone meal, and we need 7. So it was off to the tree chopping land for a while again, and after 2 stacks of saplings, give or take, we had 7 bone meal and 7 clay balls, which we could combine to create porcelain clay. The porcelain clay can make a crucible that gets hot enough to melt cobblestone into lava. After a while, of course, which gave us plenty more time to move on with Plan Infinite Cobblestone. A regular cobblegen is slow and boring, so instead what I'll do is use a Gregtech hammer to mash 2 copper ingots into 1 copper plate, which is a terrible ratio, but it's what we've got, and use those plates to make a Create mod pipe network hooked up to a stone barrel. We now have to move our lava, and the only safe way to do that is with an iron bucket, which we'll need more plates for. And thankfully here I remembered that the Create press lets you make 1-to-1 sheets for a few early game metals, including copper and iron, so I made sure to set one up. With cheaper sheets, we could easily make an iron bucket, because of course you need sheets for that, and safely transport our fresh lava to the stone barrel, and make chutes to automatically pull cobblestone out of them into a storage drawer for automatic infinite cobblestone. Letting that build up, I did some storage sorting, and even set up a Create super smelter, so that we wouldn't have to wait for things to smelt in a furnace or use any fuel. I also let the worms loose again, so that we can make 20 more sieve meshes in order to sieve 25 blocks at once, which I used on sand to get gems and sea life, and dust to get weirder gems, redstone, glowstone, and sulfur, all of which we need today. We're closer to gold than ever before, but gold needs steel, and so first we have to make a primitive blast furnace, which means we need a massive amount of clay. And our only way of producing it is to right-click a barrel filled with water while holding dust. Not wanting to do that 1 bucket at a time, I used fluid pipes to connect a bunch of barrels to a cobblestone generator, so we didn't have to do this manually, but this probably took a lot longer than it needed to, since I could have just made a separate pump for this and it would have gone way faster. But if you think I learned from my mistakes, no, because I end up just adding more barrels to this thing when I felt it was slow, and after way too long, we did have a ton of stacks of fire clay dust. But before we could make the PBF, we need Gregtech tools to make screws and rods and rings and other weird microcrafting parts. So I braced myself for the microcrafting grind. Using the new tools, we could shape the dust into raw bricks, get those smelted, and turn them into fire brick blocks. Now we just needed some wrought iron, which is like iron, but better, and surprisingly easy to get, if not a bit annoying. You just have to sizzle iron ingots on a campfire, and they'll pop right off as wrought iron. More like campfire iron, if you know what I'm saying. With a bunch more microcrafting, we finally have the PBF controller, and all the fire bricks we're gonna need to make our first multi-block. The primitive blast furnace combines 1 wrought iron and 2 charcoal over an agonizing 40 seconds to create 1 ingot of steel. And we're gonna need hundreds, if not thousands of these ingots today, so it's really important I stock this thing up to keep it producing. Now you might be thinking, hey, wait, why does steel turn into gold in this pack? And it doesn't. Steel makes a machine that makes gold, which should mean that we're finally able to make the machine that makes the gold. No, foolish child. We're trying to make a kinetic ore factory, which is a multi-block that requires input and output ports, and those require LV machine holes, and those require rubber-coated wires, and those require a machine that takes glass! And for some reason, the developers of this pack made glass Gregified. Grind sand into quartz dust and then mine gravel for flint and grind that into flint dust, separating the flint dust into tiny piles of flint dust, combine the quartz dust and the tiny flint dust to make glass dust. Don't put that into a furnace, instead put it on a campfire, and that is the completely sane and logical way to make 1 single block of glass. But now that we have the glass for an arboreal extractor, the only tree it works on is jungle, for some reason. I don't know. Which means it's finally time to sieve up some dirt, which explodes into insane amounts of organic material, like crops and seeds, but importantly, saplings, including jungle. The last things we needed were some micro-crafted Gregtech parts and a few thermal series bits, and just like that, we've gone from chopping trees to draining them. Of course, one of these is really slow, so I tediously made all the parts to make 7 more of them, connected them all to the jungle tree, and hooked them all together with pipes so I wouldn't have to wait until all of them filled up before I could take out a bucket and make rubber out of it. But finally, we had the last components for the LV machine holes we'd need, as rubber is easy to make from latex, and after a ton of steel smelting and wire crafting and microplating, we had synthesized our first LV machine holes, which we could turn into a kinetic input port and an item output port. All the other inputs and outputs we'd need could actually be kept at ULV, so they're pretty simple. So with just a bit more Gregtech crafting shenanigans, we had all the blocks and ports we needed to run this beast of a machine. And after hooking up a ton of water wheels, we had all the stress units, RPMs, and water throughput we needed to run this giant brick eyesore. Not only does it have a chance to double any crushed ores we put into it, but finally it unlocks for us gold. And that means our first steam engines. These beasts require loads of heaters and tanks, and I plan to fuel them with charcoal from a tree farm. Originally, I wanted to superheat the burners by blowing fans into them to make the steam engine level 18, but that consumed fuel so quick I couldn't produce it fast enough. So after way too long of trying and failing to make it work, I ended up making 2 level 9 steam engines because it makes the same effect. We have nearly 300,000 stress units to work with, basically for free at this point. It's time to finally dive into early cobblestone processing. I make 21 mechanical crafters, which unlock the recipe for Create's crushing wheels, and using 3 pairs of them, I can make a cobblestone into gravel and cobblestone into sand crushing tower. For now, I'll input the cobblestone manually, but in the future, it'll be so easy to make things automatic. Now that pretty much all the ores and gems within our grasp is easily accessible to us, it's time we push for the next tier of materials, from the flint meshes. But that's gonna require us to power through. Getting into Gregtech, however, asks us to do a lot of part crafting, and having our storage all over the place is going to make that really hard. To fix that, I can make an early game storage solution using colossal chests and Tom Simple storage. It's really easy to create a colossal chest. It just costs a ton of wood, and I can slap a Tom Simple storage crafting interface right on top of it to give us full GUI storage system support. It's a lot like the matter energy system that we're going for the goal of this video, so why not just settle with this? Well, it doesn't have auto crafting, and there's a lot of NBT issues with it, so it is a super temporary solution. But still, all the crafting trees that we're going to be subjected to later will be way easier to handle. And if you know Gregtech, you know that before we can make any LV machines, we need LV circuits, and they're a crafting tree all in themselves. Thankfully, the only ingredient that we're actually completely missing is sticky resin, but we can make an infinite amount of that really easily. Earlier, I'd made a coke oven multi-block to produce creosote that turns wood into treated wood, which we can use to make 2 large barrels. One of the barrels is going to hold mycelial seeds from dirt sieving and water to make infinite witch water, and the other will use that witch water and a shiitake spore to duplicate the spores automatically. We can cook those to get slime, and cook slime to get sticky resin. Otherwise, we do need a lot of paper, and I only have like 5 sugarcane, but thankfully, there's a multi-block that can duplicate sugarcane completely for free, so paper is well within our grasp. But now the real work begins. LV circuits! Go! We have to craft resin boards and then turn them into printed boards with copper wire. We'll need glass tubes and steel bolts to make vacuum tubes and resistors, which require our sticky resin and paper with a mix of charcoal dust, and mashing all those bits together with our bare hands nets us 1 LV circuit. Yeah, not a lot, and we're gonna need way more than that, but these are expensive for us, especially the red alloy wires. The boards alone take 8 copper, and the glass tubes take enormous amounts of glass to produce in large quantities, but thankfully there will be LV machines that are gonna make these way easier to make. That being said, all of those machines require more than 1 circuit, so the first LV circuit grind begins. Plates, glass, resin, I'm crafting everything until we have a healthy nest egg of 10 circuits that we can use for machines to our heart's desires. And our heart desires electricity. Thankfully, this is where those beefy steam engines really come out to play, because we can use enormous amounts of RPM and stress units on a generator coil to create our first electricity production. I use our first circuit on a carbon brushes block that will connect to the generator coil. Then I need to surround them with special magnets, which are easy enough to make since they only take stone and magnetite dust, an ore that we have plenty of access to from gravel sieving. So super quickly, we have our first spot of FE being generated. FE is modded electricity, if you don't know. That being said, it's not a lot. Thankfully, making a new Create mod machine called an Energizer, we can charge diamonds and gold and use those with the basic magnets to turn them into fluxated magnets, which is 2 tiers above the regular ones we were just using, and it pushes our power gen well over 1,000. But I was locked right in, so I grinded out 2 more coil setups, pushing our power generation to nearly 4,000 FE a tick. Thing is, Gregtech is too good for FE-based power, so we have to make a converter in order to actually use it, which needs the first tier of superconductor wiring, soul-infused ingots, which is an alloy of soul sand and invar. Thankfully, we already have the means for invar since we have nickel dust from the ore factory, and iron is the only other ingredient. We can use the witch water from our shiitake farm to make sand into soul sand, and then use a Create fan behind a soul fire to turn sand into soul sand for free. Soul steel ingots become a really easy craft, but sadly, their wiring is quite expensive. Remember, I still need to use 1 plate for 1 wire, and these guys don't work in the mechanical press, so it's 2 entire ingots for 1 single wire. But with our new converter in hand, we have access to a machine that'll cut the cost of wires by a factor of 4. First up, though, we need a few more components, including magnetic rods, and not wanting to waste redstone to actually magnetize them, I make our very first Gregtech machine. The polarizer. It'll magnetize my rods automatically. We can now make the first of the electric motors of the game, which are needed for the wire mill, a machine that can turn 1 ingot into 2 wires. An amazing upgrade. We can also make the first electric pistons to make a bender, which can finally make 1-to-1 sheets of all metals. No more 2 steel, 1 plate. Oh my god, we're free. But we're not done yet. We have a circuit nest egg, and I'm gonna spend them. We craft the lathe for cheaper rods, and even make it all the way to the LV assembler we needed. Yeah, we already have access to buckets of new recipes and tech tiers, including the coveted flint mesh. And with flint meshes in hand, the quest can begin for the most important multi-block in the entire game, the electric blast furnace. Oh, the EBF, the sweet muse of Gregtech. We need to advance into the MV tier of technology in order to unlock applied energistics. And like LV used steel, MV uses aluminum, a metal that's so unlike other girls, it requires the heat of an EBF with Copernical coils to smelt it. And if you don't like the way I pronounce Copernical, then please leave a detailed comment about how I am unintelligent below. If you're not familiar with the EBF, it's an upgradable multi-block that uses special heating coils in order to smelt resources. We're gonna need it for every metal in the game going forward, pretty much. Right now, the only coils we have access to is the Copernical coils, which is the lowest tier of heat and will require a huge amount of Copernical wire, bronze foil, and liquid tin alloy. As you might have guessed, we'll need to alloy copper and nickel to make Copernical. Although copper is plentiful, the ore factory doesn't make a load of nickel, but here's where those flint meshes I made earlier come into play. I can haunt cobblestone into blackstone, and then I make a new machine called a macerator that'll crush the blackstone into crushed blackstone, which we can sieve over the flint meshes and produce loads of nickel ore. ore, which is gonna give us way more than we ever had access to. We'll need another new machine, the alloy smelter, to smelt the Copernical ingots, and we'll actually be turning those into 2 X wires instead of 1. I'll also get to use our new bender on bronze plates to turn them into bronze foil. The last thing we need is liquid tin alloy, which is a lot more of a pain to get. The actual ingot is easy to make, tin and iron in an alloy smelter, but melting it down is where it hurts. We need an extractor, which requires the dubious electric pump, a micro part that sends shivers down any Gregtech player's spine to make. I mean, just look at all the steps you have to do to make one of these by hand. It is such a pain. But our reward is a machine that can finally melt down ingots and blocks, including our tin alloy. With all the ingredients, we can now make the first of our coils inside of an assembler. Told you it was important. And we'll need to make 16 coils to support 1 EBF. While the coils craft, we still have to make heat-resistant Invar blocks, so it's time to bend, lathe, and wrench those Invar ingots into dozens of new shapes to make all the plating blocks we need. Most of the inputs and outputs we already have, but a noteworthy one is the energy port. We've gotten to the point where our multi-blocks now need electrical power to function, and I have to admit, I've kind of buried the lead on something. Aluminum requires MV power to be smelted, but we only have access to LV ports and converters, and to make the MV ones, we need aluminum anyways. So, are we stuck? Well, obviously not, the video hasn't ended. Multi-blocks are special in the fact that they can be overclocked. Having 2 ports of the same energy tier results in a power level 1 tier above them for an increased energy cost. So all I need are 2 LV ports and we'll be swimming in MV power. Finally, our first beautiful EBF can be instructed, full of NV power and beautiful coils. Though I feel like I'm kind of forgetting something. Oh right, I don't have any aluminum. So I sieve sand on flint meshes for raw sapphire ores that we can crush into dirty sapphire dust and clean inside of a cauldron. Then, by making an electrolyzer, we can separate the aluminum and oxygen just out of it, giving us access to a decent supply of aluminum and honestly a huge amount of oxygen, which we can use later for better steel production. But for now, we're popping the aluminum dust inside of the blast furnace and watching as it consumes just an insane amount of power and emits just a godly glow. The aluminum is gonna take a good while to smelt, so I take some time to make some high storage fluid cells from thermal in order to store ridiculous amounts of oxygen because we're gonna need the space. For a moment, it actually kind of seems like our goal was becoming close. I mean, we're on the barrier of medium voltage, and realistically, it was only a matter of time. And circuits. Yeah, Applied Energistics needs a huge amount of circuits to do anything meaningful, since they're used in the storage cell crafting recipes. And we'll need MV circuits for a few required MV machines, and at this stage, 1 MV circuit needs 3 LV ones, a price that we cannot afford. But on the horizon of invention is a machine so powerful that it can reduce the crafts of circuits to remarkably low costs. And if we're truly going to get back to where we were in the last series, we have to get our hands on... But first, we do actually have to get our hands on medium voltage circuits, which require new resources entirely, like gallium arsenide and new circuit boards. The gallium arsenide isn't hard at all. I make a centrifuge to extract arsenic dust from real gar, and a mixer to combine the arsenic with gallium that we got from the ore factory earlier. The circuit boards, however, are a bit more of a headache, as from now on, we'll need special acids to complete each board, and first up on the acid train is sodium persulfate. Get ready for some realistic chemistry. The path to sodium persulfate has me crafting 4 chemical reactors and giving them their own power line, since they're going to be our first semi-automatic processing. We combine sulfur and oxygen to make sulfur dioxide, and then combine that with more oxygen to make sulfur trioxide. And what's better than sulfur trioxide? Wet sulfur trioxide, which is also known as sulfuric acid. Fun to play with, not to eat. We can now dunk some salt inside of our new sulfuric acid mixture to create sodium bisulfate dust, which is almost useful. It needs to be electrolyzed first to be turned into liquid sodium persulfate. And now that we have the acid we need, we actually need the board to etch, which is also a really easy product. Just combining some wood pulp and glue in an assembler, and we are right there. Using some silver foil, the tasty sodium persulfate, and our new circuit boards, we can make our tier 2 MV level circuit boards. Now with a dash of gallium arsenide, a pinch of copper wire, and a drop of liquid glass, we can make the diodes required for medium voltage circuits. So what are we actually going to do with our first MV circuits? Make an LV machine, of course. The circuit assembler is that godly powerful machine I talked about earlier, but because of its absolute insanity in the way that it can reduce costs for you, it actually costs circuits 1 tier above itself to craft. But it's so worth it. You see, each tier of technology have 3 tiers of circuits circuits themselves. So at LV, there's 3 circuits. At MV, there's 3 circuits, and so on and so forth. Each tier of circuit is cheaper and more efficient than the last, but requiring higher tier machinery and crafting materials, and that's where the circuit assembler comes in. But that's only half the battle. We need to create actual circuit chips in order to get the tier 2 LV and MV circuits, and that requires silicon boule processing, which is going to take us deep into the throes of medium voltage. The silicon boules, however, take actual real-life minutes to smelt, so I get those started immediately by making an arc smelter to smelt glass directly from sand using oxygen, crushing that in glass dust and centrifuging it into silicon dioxide dust, and then EBFing that with some gallium arsenide to create the boules. In order to process them into circuits, though, we'll need 2 machines, an MV laser engraver and an MV cutter, which is going to require us to progress so deep into medium voltage that you're going to forget what we're even doing. Our work is cut out for us. And so, the time for medium voltage arrives. In LV, the superconductor we used were easy to make soul steel, but MV asked for signalum, which is overall cheap to make, but requires absolutely ages in a blast furnace to smelt a single ingot. I got impatient while waiting and opted to just make a single amp MEV converter rather than a 4 amp one, which will bite me in the butt later, but it works for now to power an electrolyzer that I immediately make so that we can turn ruby dust into aluminum and chromium, which is an extremely important material for vanadium steel. If you've ever rushed applied energistics like myself, vanadium steel is going to send shivers down your spine. A material that is absolutely required to make an MV cutter, and as its own tech path to achieve. See, not only do we need chromium, but we need vanadium, which must be extracted from vanadium magnetite ore, a resource we could only extract through iron tier sieving. It's time to create the medium voltage assembler. And not only is it the upgraded tier of the LV assembler, so it's faster and unlocks new resources, but it actually has a secret use that makes it one of the best blocks in the entire pack. More on that later, though. Luckily, we have loads of aluminum, copper wires, and circuits, so the assembler actually comes in somewhat cheaply, and we begin to craft our new iron meshes. And that secret use? Well, obtaining the MV assembler unlocks the rocket boots in the shop, which once charged grant us full creative mode flight, which makes moving around our void world so much easier than before, and actually catches us up to our second to last episode of this pack. We really are approaching the final rush now. But back to vanadium steel land, we'll need an MV mixer, so I can make one that actually uses RPM and EU instead of just EU, which is actually cheaper to craft and a lot faster. It does kind of mean I have to route stress units around and make our MV line look a bit ugly, but it's a price I'm willing to pay. Now we can sieve gravel on top of iron meshes to get a hold of vanadium magnetite ore, which we can crush and then centrifuge to separate out the vanadium dust. Combining that with chromium and steel dust in our new mixer to produce the vanadium steel compound we have finally been working towards. Naturally, this takes ages to smelt, so through the power of editing, the vanadium steel is already done, and we can finally make the buzzsaw needed for the advanced cutter. It needs a fluid to use inside of it, and we can make a distillery at LV to get distilled water, which runs a bit faster than regular water. Now finally, we can process down those silicon boules I crafted ages ago. We can now cut the silicon boules into silicon wafers, and then engrave those wafers with the laser engraver with different colored lenses to turn them into different circuit wafers. I've already grabbed a ruby lens earlier on in order to inscribe ILC wafers, and then the ILC wafers go back into the cutter to produce final IC chips. And with those integrated circuit chips, we can make the ultra cheap tier 2 LV and MV circuits that are absolutely going to supercharge the We are finally right on the horizon of applied energistics. We've progressed all the way into medium voltage, obtained creative flight, mastered the create mod, and now have the cheapest low voltage and medium voltage circuits that we're going to have access to for a long time. But applied energistics is still locked behind a metal so elusive we currently have no way of smelting it. Silicon. Silicon ingots require a Canthal tier blast furnace and have new and strange properties we haven't even encountered yet. But let's start with Canthal coils, the first step to silicon ingots. They need that chromium I was talking about earlier, and we're running low on that, but luckily I rubbed my last few functional brain cells together and remembered that I can actually use deployers to sieve for me and use item collectors to pick up all the loot. So getting a load more ruby ore was actually pretty convenient. We can now mix chromium, aluminum, and iron to create Canthal dust, which requires requires high voltage power to smelt. So it's time to use those new circuit wafers we've got in order to create 2 MV power hatches to overclock our EBFs to high voltage. And since we're now at that stage of the game where we're going to need more and more and more and more ingots, which take longer and longer and longer to smelt, I make another electric blast furnace. Unfortunately, we lack sufficient power to run 2 high voltage EBFs at once, so it's time to give our power supply a big boost. In order to upgrade our magnets, though, we're going to need a higher tier of ore factory, the electrokinetic ore factory. The EKOF is a steel behemoth, and it takes nearly 200 ingots of the stuff. Luckily, we can make steel on the EBF with wrought iron and oxygen way faster than the primitive blast furnace, and I am not going to make you watch me craft the frankly excessive amounts of decorative and functional blocks we need, so hey, look at that. As expensive as it was, we have ourselves a fully functioning electrokinetic ore factory, complete with distilled water, power inputs, and Create Mod RPM. This is a massive upgrade, having the time it takes to process all the ores that we can and unlocking entirely new processing lines. Most importantly, we now have access to neodymium, which is probably the slowest resource I have to produce, since it takes multiple machines of processing, and all of them just take forever. So in the meantime, I sieve down dust on flint meshes for skystone dust in order to create an alloy that we'll need for applied energistics called star steel. Still, after an extremely long time, like long enough that I made 2 more steam engines for fun, we have enough neodymium to make a full 12 neodymium magnet array to upgrade our power supply. We drastically increase our stress unit requirements, but also push our FE production efficiency to 90%. And plugging it into our EBFs, it's not enough power? At least I thought it wasn't enough power. Actually, I didn't have enough amperage, which is a part of the realistic energy system that Gregtech adds, and I don't have time to explain realistic electricity to you, so here's the entire Wikipedia page for an amperage. I hope that helps. But basically, I just made more converters and it made my EBFs work, which gives us all the speed and all the power that we need to smelt those Canthal ingots. However, when Canthal is smelted in an EBF, it comes out blazing red hot and completely unusable, so I have to burn my blocky little hands as I rush the half-molten ingots into a chemical bath that'll cool them down into usable materials. Side note, this makes smelting Canthal take even longer. The actual coil making process, though, isn't really bad, and I end up just going the full mile to make all the coils needed to upgrade both of our EBFs for convenience sake. With Canthal coils within our grubby little hands, we have the power to melt down silicon. Now, smelting silicon dust directly takes years, but there's an alternative method that has us smelting silicon dioxide dust, which we get from glass processing, and carbon dust, which we get from diamond electrolysis, and that smelts into silicon ingots considerably faster. Much like the required coils, silicon ingots come out red hot, so just know that for every ingot I use, I have to dump it in this stupid chemical bath that takes way too long. But finally, with silicon ingots in hand, we have progressed far enough into Gregtech to have access to all the machines we'll need to create applied energistics. Time to create these circuit presses. Inside of a forming press, I can combine the star steel I made earlier with gold, silicon, diamond, and Certus quartz crystals to make various applied energistics circuit presses. To actually use the circuit presses, though, we'll need to use an alloy smelter, and since there are 4 of them, I craft up 3 more alloy smelters so we can run all 4 of them at once, and I decided on making a stack of each of the raw circuits. If you know applied energistics, then you'll know we're going to need oogles and boogles more silicon circuits than any of the other ones, since to turn a raw circuit into a proper circuit, we need to combine one with a silicon circuit. So if you thought I was free from silicon processing, ha! Never! After some time, though, we have every type of applied energistics circuit at our disposal, and now we can begin to create the ME system that we have been dreaming about for so long. We create Fluix crystals to mill into Fluix cables and create an energy acceptor, a block that converts FE into AE power, and begin using our new circuits to create a terminal to access items and a disk drive to store them in. And also, don't tell anybody, but I do disable the AE channels because I absolutely hate that feature with all of my heart. With cables, an acceptor, a disk drive, and gameplay mechanics turned off, we finally have the bones of an ME system set up. All we need is the item cells used to digitally store our many things. And since we have so much access to easy circuits, I am able to make a ton of 1K, 4K, and even 16K storage parts, slotting them into cheap cell housings. With one fell swoop of an axe, I can pop our colossal chest like a piñata and use a magnet to drag all the items towards our new super small on the outside, large on the inside item storage system from nothing more then a tree on some dirt, we have achieved the pinnacle technology of item management and storage. So thanks for making it this far in the video. And if you're ready for the return of star technology, you know what to do. We're back, baby. Polytetrafluoroethylene is a real word in the real world and is really important to my Skyblock playthrough for some reason. You see, I'm stranded here, and the path to escape is full of realistic chemistry, which is very confusing for my chemically imbalanced brain. But there is a machine that can not only make realistic chemistry more simple, but also less expensive. But in order to make it, I need polytetrafluoroethylene. And I'll tell you a secret. PTFE is a chemical, so in order to overcome the realistic chemistry, I must master it. But it won't be my only obstacle. We'll need to advance well into the high voltage tier of technology to produce PTFE, so I better get to... First, I'd really like a better power source, and thankfully the OG of Minecraft returns in a big way. Diamonds can be turned into nearly 500,000 FE, and we have an easy and consistent way to make an infinite amount of them using the kinetic sieve multiblock. It's cheap, but a really time-consuming process to make all the treated wood components for it, but it is really cool looking, though we still need to fuel it with tons of sand. And here comes my favorite cobblestone generator, the Igneous Extruder, a one-block superhero of cobblestone. Just place it between water and lava, and it makes cobblestone forever, but it's a bit slow in its basic form, so thankfully we can make an MV upgrade kit to make the guy run 16 times faster than normal, which is probably more cobblestone than we're gonna need. And with a little bit of storage drawer magics, we've got sand infinitely flowing into the sieve, where diamonds, lapis, emeralds, and quartz infinitely flows out. With a lapidary dynamo, we can burn our diamonds into millions and millions of power, and fueled by an MV upgrade kit, will produce 3,200 FE per tick. Not as fast as our current generation, but way more space efficient, fuel efficient, and scalable. And you know, while we're at upgrading our power generation, let's upgrade our power cables. No more Create mod wires. We're upgrading to Ender.io conduits, which will transfer way more power. And now, it's as Uncle Ben once said, with great power comes even better electric furnaces. So I set out to upgrade our coils from Canthal to Nichrome. Not strictly needed for any recipes, but the hotter the EBF, the faster it smelts, and we'll be needing to smelt copious amounts of metals going forward. Nichrome is actually a really simple blend of nickel and chromium, all of which we have plenty of, but it does take a while to smelt down, so it's time to immerse ourselves in the art of Gregtech multitasking. The high voltage casing metal is stainless steel, a blend of iron, steel, chromium, and manganese, and the wire is lumium, an easier blend of glowstone, tin, and silver. We're able to process or achieve all of those resources, but we'll not only need to mix up enough of those blends, but make sure they're smelting in an EBF alongside our nichrome. So now that we're waiting on 3 different ingots to smelt, we may as well make some strides toward high voltage circuitry by engraving and cutting silicon boules into the necessary RAM wafers and chips. Even after that, we're still waiting on smelting, so let's automate something else. I'd really like to have infinite redstone since it's fairly useful, so we can use another kinetic sieve, but I don't want to wait an hour for the components to craft again, so I'll make an MV extruder, a machine that can make things like gears and rotors directly from ingots instead of this nightmare. And of course, as always, whilst Gregtech multitasking, here's where things go wrong. While working on the sieve, I go to cool or hot nichrome ingots, only to realize in abject horror that they can't be cooled in a simple chemical bath. I'll need a vacuum freezer, which requires extreme voltage circuits that require a load of high voltage technology, and worst of all, the clean room. I hate the clean room, but we've already worked so hard to get this far. I mean, we're nearly at nichrome coils. Am I really gonna give up just because? Yes, I hate the clean room and we're not doing it, so I stop smelting my nichrome and move on with getting our redstone and sulfur automated from another big old sieve. And since our plans have changed, there's not much between us and high voltage. Well, nothing except... Yeah, that's right, we're doing subchapters today. Not to be confused with polytetrafluoroethylene, polyethylene is the first plastic we'll make today. And yes, there are more we're making, because polyethylene is a key component for high voltage machine holes and circuit parts, and oh god, is it a chemistry nightmare. It is used in so many essential crafts, so it's not just good enough to make it once. It needs to be automatic and it needs to be fast. Our first step to polyethylene is plain old ethylene, which we can make in a ton of different ways, but my favorite is to make a sideways sideways EBF that the nerds call a pyrolyze oven. If we fill this guy up with water and biochaff, it'll make a ton of buckets of biomass, which is important, but biomass needs infinite biological material, so it's a pretty good deal that the large farms we have access to will just make us sugarcane for free, forever, money back guarantee, 0% APR down payment, and we can then compress the infinite sugarcane into infinite plant balls, and macerate our infinite balls into infinite biochaff, and we've got our biomass infinitely a-flowing. But how do we turn biomass into ethylene? Well, there's a middleman. We'll need everyone's favorite volatile, flammable liquid, ethanol, which we can get by simply distilling our biomass. But ethanol, while a fun way to spend the weekend, isn't ethylene, and thankfully, we're only one step away. Kind of. Remember sulfuric acid from last episode? We need it. Lots of it. And it's time to automate the process. We'll need to fully automate our oxygen, but I plan to do that later today, so for now, I'm just gonna move the sulfur and oxygen manually. Don't, type a mean comment, we'll get to it. That being said, it's actually the same lengthy process as before, but this time at medium voltage for speed and with much larger buffers of resources. And speaking of resources, these videos take a long time to make, and although I don't have a sponsor today, I do have a Patreon that you can find down in the description to help me do things like eating and making these videos for you guys. And who knows, maybe there's gonna be a world download there in the future, I don't know, winkety winkety, but consider supporting. And by mixing our ethanol and sulfuric acid, we get our delicious ethylene and a nasty byproduct of some diluted acid, which I couldn't care less about, so I try to make a system with Ender.io to filter it out into a nullifier, but setting the fluid filters crashed my game. Wait, when did I last save? Did it autosave before I did all my machines? Did I just lose hours of machine processing and engineering? Did I just corrupt my world? It crashed again. Oh, no, okay, unrelated. Cool, all right, time to set the filter. Uh-oh. Okay, so it looks like Ender.io is feeling a little bit feisty, and unfortunately that makes my only method of moving fluids filtered Gregtech pumps. Well, at least I can filter them without crashing my game. With that, I can inject some oxygen into the ethylene to finally create polyethylene, which I both store in a large fluid cell and process into polyethylene sheets inside of a fluid solidifier, because those are its two most useful forms. We can now make our very first high voltage circuits and machines, but it's clear we'll need to progress to cheaper circuits. And lo and behold, polyethylene unlocks the first of the SMD components, ultra efficient versions of circuit crafting parts like capacitors and resistors, usually crafting half a stack at a time or more. In order to make and use them though, we'll need an MV circuit engraver and an HV assembler. Thankfully, due to our prep earlier, we have the means to make both of these behemoth machines and all the needed parts to power them. SMD components, however, take some new fancy schmancy resources like tantalum, a metal that requires us to make diamond meshes? Well, anyways, diamond meshes come after iron meshes and need the HV assembler to make them. And though they're pretty expensive, they're also pretty sparkly and give us tasty new materials like tantalite, which can be further processed into tantalum dust, which doesn't even need to be smelted into the EBF. What a guy! What does need to be smelted in the EBF, however, is a new alloy, the ferrite zinc compound. But with both that and tantalum in my hands, I can make 4 stacks of inductors, basically for free. Oh my god, I love SMD components. To make the diodes, we need platinum, and nope, I'm not doing that today. Nope. So the last SMD resource that we're looking for is polyvinyl chloride, our second plastic of the day, or PVC, which actually uses the ethylene we're producing, but it also needs chlorine, which it isn't something we've automated. In fact, we don't really have a lot automated, including oxygen, which we're now out of, and so we have found ourselves at the great wall of Gregtech, the moment in any playthrough where any player realizes they need to stop, turn around, take a good look at their base, and realize... Thankfully though, in Gregtech, there's always a way, and right now we're about to solve our oxygen problem in a big way using topaz. Now that we have stainless steel accessible, we can make RF-powered sieves that will automatically sieve for us in a really compact space and automatically output into a drawer network that can hold thousands of resources. But as a side note, it was really slow, so I just replaced it with a deployer later, so never mind that. I even begin the process of connecting it to our ME network, including our sand production for the kinetic sieves, so that we can automatically access all of our resources and send them around. So now, with our automatic sand hooked up to everywhere, and the automatic sieve resources hooked up to everywhere, we can make processing the topaz really easy. I have the topaz ore sent into forge hammers to turn them into impure dusts, then have those dusts washed and electrolyzed, and between the regular and blue topaz electrolysis, we produce enormous amounts of oxygen, hydrogen, fluorine, aluminum, and silicon, all of which are essential to our playthrough, and get plugged directly into our ME system to access process and send around for future crafting, which is exactly what we do to the oxygen, sending it automatically to our polyethylene and sulfuric acid machine. But not before running into the same issue with Ender IO filters crashing the game, and this time I couldn't even get back into my world, so as a Hail Mary, I just updated Ender IO, and it worked. It even fixed the issue. I could just use it now. Okay. Well, we can now much more confidently make some polyvinyl chloride by electrolyzing some leftover salt into chlorine and combining it with ethylene and then oxygen. It's not automatic yet, but for now it doesn't have to be. Not only can we now make even more SMD components, but we now have access to the amazing plastic circuit boards that make the final tier LV and MV circuits, as well as the much cheaper tier 2 HV circuits. Our new circuits are now insanely cheap compared to before, and now that we have the HV materials needed, we can finally push towards polytetrafluoroethylene, and we nearly have all the required ingredients. Nearly is the key word, though. The final two chemicals we'll need to synthesize the ever-important plastic is methane and chlorine, neither of which we have. There are loads of complicated and expensive paths to automating these two integral resources, but I go for magic plants. Yeah, they Gregified mystical agriculture. Yeah, that's not a joke. For PTFE, we need chloroform, the mixture of chlorine and methane, which we'll get from growing it from magical I do this for my job, do you know that? Well, in any case, to get these magical means of productions, we're going to need a mythical fuel known as Inferium Essence, and we'll need a lot of it. So thankfully, there's a multi-block that we have access to that can just straight up duplicate it. Despite the fact that it costs a lot of steel, invar, and aluminum, we've got a decent backlog of all that stuff, so we can just build it right now. But before using it to duplicate Inferium, we need Inferium. Thankfully, it's a somewhat simple mixture of beryllium from emerald ore processing and phosphorus dust, which I have no idea why I had on hand, but I did. By placing just one Inferium into the Essence duplicator, it gets to work, and overclocked to high voltage speeds, it runs really fast, which is great because we have to centrifuge the Inferium into its 4 base essences before we can start making seeds, and honestly, we need a lot of these things. The recipe takes forever and has terrible output rates, so while that goes on, we should probably prepare to actually process our eventual magic seeds. So we'll need HV emitters to craft mystical greenhouses, and those greedy little emitters wants an Eye of Ender. And since there's no nether to speak of, Eyes of Ender are a bit more of a process to acquire. We'll need to combine sulfur and carbon in a high voltage chemical reactor to produce blaze powder, which gets melted into liquid blaze. Then we'll need to bathe an ender pearl at high voltage power inside of the liquid blaze to actually make Eyes of Ender, and then soon after, the emitters and the mystical greenhouse are ours, and we can process our seeds infinitely with water and Inferium fuel present. To make the seeds, we compress 16 of a base essence into an essence seed, which I do for all of them: water, air, earth, and fire, which means I can grow even more essences to craft 16 wood essences to make wood seeds, and that took an hour. But finally, we can grow water essence in the mystical greenhouse and use an essence burner to turn it into salt water, which can be processed into salt and then chlorine. And by growing wood essence in the mystical greenhouse, we can essence burn that into rubber logs and centrifuge them into methane. The setup I have right now is pretty ugly, but thankfully, with a snap of my fingers, I've magically made it off camera even better. Infinite, automatic, and kind of sleek if you ask me. Now, the chlorine line goes way faster than the methane line, but there are better methane production lines later in progression, so I don't really care. And honestly, I think this means we can finally make... We'll need to combine fluorine and hydrogen to make hydrofluoric acid, chlorine and methane to make chloroform, and then chloroform and hydrofluoric acid to make tetrafluoroethylene. We'll also make a ton of hydrochloric acid byproduct, which I'm gonna keep because it is so majorly useful in the long run. With tetrafluoroethylene, all we have to do is add some oxygen to the relationship to make it poly, and finally, we have access to the king of chemistry, the plastics of all plastics, polytetrafluoroethylene! With it, we can make the PTFE sheets and ingots that can craft amazing multi-blocks. The large chemical reactor, which has the power to simplify almost every chemical recipe. For instance, instead of sulfuric acid being a 3-step process requiring oxygen and sulfur and water, we can just directly craft it from sulfur and water. Couldn't be easier. But I'd really like to run these at high voltage power, and I'm really tired of overclocking MV energy hatches, so let's get ourselves some high voltage hatches, eh? We'll need a new circuit wafer type, and thus a new lens, but it's a bit of of a process to get there, so we're gonna go through it together. It can't be made from gemstones. Instead, we have to form glass dust into a Gregtech glass pane and lay that into a clear glass lens, but we have to dye it, and for some reason we can't use regular dye, so after extracting regular dumb dye from our flowers, we have to combine it with sulfuric acid and salt to make, I don't know, better dye. But that is what we can use in a high voltage chemical bath, and it has to be high voltage, to dye glass orange. Okay, but hey, it works, and it has the power to engrave LPIC wafers, but these babies won't cut in a lowly MV cutter, no, so the grind isn't over yet. As you all know, cutters require some new esoteric alloy, and the high voltage one wants blue steel, and this thing sucks. The blue steel alloy is literally made up of 4 other alloys: rose gold steel, black bronze, and brass. And black bronze, by the way, is also made up of other alloys. So this micromanaging takes way too long, but finally we have ourselves a handful of blue steel dust that will cook right on up inside of an EBF into the 4 blue steel we need to make our buzzsaw. And now, finally, we have access to amazing chemical power, as well as amazing it's not cutting. That's weird. Circuit settings are correct. I've got distilling fluid in it. Surely that doesn't mean... I hate the clean room, and we're not doing it. The clean room. I hate the clean room. I'm stranded on the Skyblock Island, and the only way to escape is for me to conquer Gregtech, Minecraft's most realistic mod. But the clean room stands in my way. I hate the clean room, and it must be defeated for its crimes against me, so I've hatched a plan to both further my escape and end the clean room once and for all. I'll destroy cleanliness itself by polluting the air with my EBFs, but to produce enough smog for that, we're going to need speed. High speed steel! EBF coils that are extra hot and extra fast, but high-speed steel is no easy alloy, and I'll need to use every last brain cell in my skull in order to progress through extreme voltage and insane voltage tiers of technology. In order to defeat the clean room, I'll have to build it first. So we need concrete, which requires me to make a load of clay within my large barrels, macerate it, and then mix it with stone dust and water. That'll need to be combined with steel frames and plastic sheets, but we're low on steel, so I need to take a detour to EBF some more. Honestly, I should probably just pass this. But that aside, combining concrete, steel, and plastic makes plascrete blocks that make the frame of the clean room, and for aesthetics, I use glass instead of concrete for a few of these blocks, turn them into clean room glass, so it's not just a white box in the middle of my base. But plascrete and glass does not a clean room make, and so I need to spend far longer than I'd like making high voltage pumps in order to craft the controller block and the 8 clean room filters required for the smallest size. Still, this is all honestly cheap. Steel isn't bad for us anymore, and concrete's free. The pumps are annoying, but not really enough to be expensive, so why does it feel like I'm forgetting some extremely expensive component? Right. Our machines need to be inside of the clean room, but our power needs to be outside of it, so in order to pass power through the walls, we need a diode block. And diode blocks only accept SMD diodes, which are the only SMD component that I haven't made because they require platinum. Platinum! Again, the clean room spits in my face and laughs. If I truly want to construct it, I need to suffer the platinum group processing line, and for that, we need the literal king of acid, aqua regia, part of the nitric acid processing line. Now, I could just overclock a large chemical reactor to high voltage in order to make the nitric acid and the aqua regia super easily, but if I do that, well, I'm admitting defeat. I'm admitting that I don't want high voltage hatches, that I can just get away with lowly medium voltage hatches. I can't show the clean room weakness. We are mixing this by hand. Nitrogen and hydrogen to make ammonia. Ammonia and oxygen to make nitric oxide. Nitric oxide and oxygen make nitrogen dioxide, and nitrogen dioxide and water makes nitric acid, half of which I save because we're not done yet. The other half I have to mix with hydrochloric acid to produce the alchemist stream. Royal water. Aqua regia. Named for its ability to dissolve gold itself. Aqua Regia shall be our sous chef of platinum processing. I can now dissolve chalcopyrite and nitric acid to produce the platinum group sludge, and then centrifuging it with Aqua Regia present to separate it into loads of metal-rich dusts, including raw platinum powder, which can finally be electrolyzed to obtain pure platinum. Good lord, we can now make the tiny handful of SMD diodes needed to complete our dubious clean room. And now I can cut the wafers for high voltage hatches, and I waste absolutely no time in relishing the profits of our labor. I bathe in the light of high voltage hatches and prepare my assault against the endless swaths of clean air. May the void fill with smog. May thy filters choke on the ashes of my empire. You have invented the very means of your defeat. High voltage energy hatches are not the greatest of spoils from our conquest, not at all. We can now make extreme voltage circuits. The microprocessor supercomputer is not a cheap craft by any means, but EV is where things really begin to pick up, as now we have access to the vacuum freezer multi-block, capable of cooling higher tier ingots. And I'm definitely far beyond keeping my base even somewhat organized by this point, so I just throw down this box of aluminum right next to our AE storage system and begin just chucking white hot globs of metal inside of it. Such as my wonderful nichrome, which is somehow still hot after sitting around for a week or so. But cooling it means we can finally mill it into wires and assemble those into valuable nichrome coils, which we can now use to upgrade our EBFs. I even overclock them to extreme voltage because EV EBFs are just insane. I mean, 14 seconds for stainless steel, down from 55. That's overpowered. With nichrome on my EBFs, the Eye of Sauron turns to my endlessly slow supply of vital ingots, steel, aluminum, stainless steel, and of course, we'll need titanium and tungsten. But we can use applied energistics to passive these resources.
DeJojo, what does passive mean?
Well, you see, in packs that use mods like Gregtech, we're gonna end up needing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of certain resources. And although we have access to on-demand crafting, a far better solution for these resources is to have them being made automatically, forever, without my intervention. Hence, these resources are passive. But we must be smart about auto-crafting, so let's get some basic preparations done. I can now make high-voltage upgrade kits which will push our diamond burning power even further, but have the nasty side effect of burning our diamonds away even quicker. That's probably not going to bite us in the butt. Now, in order to produce all the gravel and sand we'll need to extract resources out of, I go ahead and make an infinite cobblestone storage cell for my AE system, which does exactly what it says on the box and is extremely powerful for this pack. And the last thing I do is tinker with my EBF line to get them all nice and ready for infinite processing. First up, steel. Not an issue at all because we already produce an infinite amount of oxygen, and although we don't yet have infinite iron, we'll need to make that later, so a simple oxygen and iron ingot export gets our LV metal a-flowin'. Aluminum is even easier since I just have to export infinite aluminum dust into the EBF infinitely, and it makes an infinite amount of aluminum ingots. That being said, we don't actually want them to produce an infinite amount of ingots, so I do put some redstone controls on our EBFs to shut them off once they reach a certain amount of stuff. I say 4,000 ingots is pretty good. But now that we have the two simple ingots out of the way, the difficulty curve comes a bit of a cliff. Next up, we have stainless steel. This is no simple blend. If we want it passive, then we need to passive manganese, iron, nickel, and chromium. Ugh. Remember that auto sieving machine that I used for Topaz last episode? Time to make a whole lot more of those because all of those resources can be processed from some amount of ore sieving. But I do need to clean up the setup, so let's go around how it works. It's a fairly simple structure, 25 sieves filled with the proper meshes, an item collector into a storage controller, and an ME exporter on the deployer to fuel up with sand, gravel, or blackstone, and of course, a storage bus on the storage controller to access all of our resources from AE. I'd like to make some ruby ore, so we need to put sand on flint meshes for 12 different resources, only one of which is ruby. And now shifting my focus a little bit, let's tackle one stone with two birds. Infinite iron means infinite stainless steel and regular steel too, and oh boy, it looks like the kinetic sieve is a good way to get the iron ores flowing. So a bunch of treated wood and brass screws later, and we have another big boy up and running. But we need a way to smelt the iron automatically. And thankfully, we have access to the bulk smelter, which can smelt stacks of items at once and even do alloying recipes too. That said, it needs more circuits than we currently have, so so I've got to take a quick HV circuit crafting detour before getting our fancy schmancy super smelter up and running with iron and magnetite ore exporting automatically in and iron exporting automatically out. So there's our iron for iron dust and ruby for chromium, but we still need manganese and nickel, which comes from pyrolusite and pentlandite respectively, so we'll need to add 2 more auto-sieving setups to our processing line. Starting to get kind of long here. Pentlandite comes from crushed blackstone, and to get that going, I need to make an igneous extruder that produces blackstone into a macerator that crushes it into what we need. And then, using applied energistics, I can route it into the system and get that pentlandite and bornite flowing. For pyrolusite, we need more iron meshes, so I spend some time staring into my assemblers while I craft them up, and thankfully, it's only gravel needed for pyrolusite, much easier than blackstone. And now we've got all the raw ores we need. Time to process them. And funny enough, we can do the same exact thing to all 3 of them, and it's fast enough at low voltage, so we're going to keep it there unless there's a tier limitation. Each ore needs to get forge hammered into a dirty dust, or washed into a clean dust, and then electrolyzed into various bits, bobs, and gases, but what we care about are the outputs chromium, manganese, and nickel. And to get iron dust, we can just macerate the iron ingots. So now all of those dusts can be created and exported automatically into a mixer and sent automatically into the EBF for automatic and infinite amounts of stainless steel. I wish I could smelt it at extreme voltage since it's 14 seconds instead of 55 at high voltage, but infinite is infinite and extreme voltage energy hatches are coming soon, don't you worry. And speaking of, we need titanium for extreme voltage machinery and hatches, and since we'll be pushing through that mess, we may as well passive it. In fact, it's one of my favorite processing lines. See, we can't just make titanium dust. We need to use the titanium tetrachloride loop in order to smelt it down, which, if done right, you can recycle every input except for rutile dust. And rutile comes from sieving and ore processing. Okay, we're gonna need bauxite, which comes from sieving gravel on diamond meshes, and you guessed it, hammer, wash, electrolyze, and we have even more aluminum oxygen byproducts. Oh my god, that stuff is free. But we also have rutile. Let's get to work. I can combine chlorine, carbon, and rutile dust to make titanium tetrachloride and carbon dioxide. The CO2 can be separated into an electrolyzer to get back the carbon we used and trash the oxygen we extracted. The titanium tetrachloride goes into an EBF alongside some magnesium dust that I made earlier from crushed obsidian, and that begins to smelt into a hot titanium ingot and 6 magnesium chloride byproducts. Lo and behold, those 6 magnesium chloride byproducts can be electrolyzed back into all of the chlorine and magnesium we used to make the titanium tetrachloride. So as long as we keep inserting rutile into the system, we have an infinite and honestly pretty free source of titanium. All we gotta do is use AE to automatically send the hot titanium ingots into the vacuum freezer, and we have ourselves a nice little passive system. But before we push deeper into insanity, I really could use a break, so I'm gonna do a little bit of tasteful AFK. Now, problems, like the dubious whack-a-mole, have a tendency to pop up as you crush them. For instance, I've been mindlessly sieving away resources and expanding our EBF away, all whilst ignoring a dwindling power fuel supply and the fact that I haven't made any superconductor metals. Speaking of, if we want to make our HSSG coils and defeat cleanliness itself, we'll need the IV assembler, which is going to ask us to use some EV technology to make it, and EV may as well stand for Ender Voltage since its superconductor is Endurium. Truth be told, it's pretty cheap, but of course, we don't have any lead being automated, and since that's 33% of the entire blend, why don't we add another kinetic sieve to the base, since it's a pretty good method of getting galena. But of course, whack one mole and another rears its snarling fangs. We're out of crushed blackstone, which we need for galena ore, so I've got to upgrade the blackstone processing line, which is not really an issue, we just have to add a high voltage macerator, but again, more moles. We're completely out of string for the 1000th time, something we need to make the mesh blocks for the kinetic sieve, and I'm really tired of using those damn worms, so we're pivoting to a more permanent solution here. A large farm fueled by fertilizer can produce a stack of flax plants in mere seconds, and one single flax plant can be turned into string. So, in less than a minute after setting the machine up, we have thousands of string right at our fingertips. Side note, where does the bag that the fertilizer comes in come from? I mean, there's no bag in this chemical reaction. Where does it come from? Anyways, now that we have passive string, we can go back to making another damn sieve for passive lead. And now that we have passive lead, passive diamonds, and passive ender pearls, we can make as much endurium as we want. Another mole, however, we need EV power to smelt it, and god damn it! Our power cables are struggling to keep up with the demands of all of our machines, and even worse, our diamond fuel supply is starting to drop really fast. But the first problem is the easier one to solve, so I'm gonna stick with that. Power cables have limitations, but what doesn't have limits is just teleporting your power. But for that, we need to make ourselves a large chemical reactor, and honestly, it's about time, especially since we have thousands of PTFE. I mean, we can make the HV energy hatches too. I can't believe I didn't make one of these earlier. Well, I guess I was focused on the clean room, right? Inside of our new LCR, I can combine 64 buckets of lava and 32 redstone dust to make fluix dust, which can be combined with ender eyes and obsidian to make a useful flux network. Ender eyes we have, but obsidian's a pain to make in large quantities, except not really, because I can make a high voltage rock breaker, which is like an igneous extruder, but I can just tell it to make obsidian for free and forever. And now that we have an infinite supply of fluix and flex components, I can teleport our power around the base with 0 transfer limits. It's kind of overpowered, actually. Now, it is way easier and way infiniter to transport our power, but our diamonds are getting pretty low. I gotta push on, though. I've taken too long. I can feel the air getting clean. Let's work on Ivy. It'll be fine. And it looks like we'll be taking a trip to Sweden for insane voltage, since we'll need tungsten, which is another recyclable processing line like titanium, but we'll need to run the process at extreme voltage, and you can't imagine the amount of moles that come with rushing through a tech tier. Okay, well, you probably can, since all we do here, and even if you can't, well, here's our shopping list. We need to create extreme voltage assembler for the emerald meshes, we need to unlock extreme voltage energy hatches while we're at it to get overclocks that we'll need for HSSG, and we need to make the high voltage circuit assembler with our EV circuits to eventually make Ivy circuits. Sure, that's like 3 steps, but it kind of encompasses a lot. Like automating nitrogen so that we can process phosphorus doped silicon boules for higher tier wafer processing, creating a new aluminum cable which needs PVC sheets, and prepping a stock of titanium plates for EV machine holes, milling Canthol wires and creating magnetic neodymium rods for the EV electric motors, and the overall tearing up chore of bulk crafting new circuits and preparing diamond meshes to be converted into emerald ones. And after a blind rush of EV tier prep, I smashed together all the resources for the EV assembler and converter and begin to process our new emerald meshes, which of course will take a while to make, so in the meantime, let's push for goal 3, the high voltage circuit assembler. A side note here, EV circuits are so annoying to make right now because they require 2 ingots of blue alloy. Not blue steel, which isn't that bad, but blue alloy, which is just so slow to make, and you don't really use it for anything else, so I never have a lot of it, just ugh. Anyways, alongside the high voltage circuit assembler, I make a high voltage laser engraver, since we'll definitely need that for higher tier wafers, such as the MPIC wafer that we need to make for the EV energy hatches. You see, it's all connected. That being said, if you thought we were close to EV energy hatches, wrong. We need an EV cutter, which of course needs a new special alloy buzzsaw, in this case, ultimate. But in a twist of fate, I actually had enough resources to mix the stuff right away and plunk it into an EVF for a nice fiery bath. So in the meantime, I work on making even more EV circuits, and I also remembered to unmute my video game audio. Sorry. But just in time too, as our ultimate is ready to go, and so is our EV cutter. And of course, it needs to be in the stupid clean room, so we need an EV diode and EV power line, and just, I hate the clean room. Well, now we can cut those MPIC wafers, but not before I switch out using distilled water for lubricant, since it's way easy to make, and by far the fastest liquid inside of a cutting machine. Of course, we're still not able to complete all of our goals here, because EV hatches require tungsten to make it, so it's off to Siving Land once again, since we can extract tungsten from scheelite, or tungstate, and that comes from those emerald meshes that have been cooking in the background. And after inexplicably blacking out and waking up with another complete mesh setup, we have infinite amounts of those ores flying right in. Now, tungsten is a lot like titanium in that the process to make it can recycle every input, save for the scheelite or the tungstate, so that's pretty fun. But we'll need to run the process entirely at extreme voltage tier, so I pony up some star coins to the shop to save me some crafting grief and just buy the circuits that I need. And now, for the lovely tungsten loop. I choose tungstate as my ore, and that gets a nice bath in some hydrochloric acid, which creates tungstate acid and lithium chloride. Electrolyzing the tungstate acid nets us nice, tasty tungsten, and all the hydrogen we use to make the hydrochloric acid. And you might have guessed that electrolyzing the lithium chloride makes us a lithium byproduct and all the chlorine we use to make the acid. So all we have to do is chemically react the chlorine and hydrogen again to make back all the hydrochloric acid and restart the loop. I love these. I really love these. Now we just have to process down our tungstate, hammering, washing, and then send it right into the processing line for infinite amounts of tungsten dust. And that's a really good thing to have infinite amounts of, because it's actually useful in 3 forms at the moment: tungsten, tungsten steel, and tungsten carbide. And do you hear that? That polluting hiss? The sound of industry running unchecked? I think we've passived our last resource today. Finally, I am now on the edge of blackening our skies and defeating the evil clean room. But in order to smelt the HSSG that I want, we will need the power of RTM coils. And although we still need to create the EV energy hatches, I really want to break from saying EV, so instead, let's push RTM. It stands for ruthenium tungsten molybdenite, and we only have tungsten automated. And can you guess how we get molybdenite? Well, if you said anything other than sieving and something and processing and I hate this, I hate this, I hate this. Sieve, and there we go, dyslexic nightmare. Like, actually, seriously though, molybdenite, a BD combo that is unreal. Unfortunately for me, ruthenium isn't actually so mundane to get our hands on, because we need to do a whole lot more of that miserable platinum group sludge thing. Ugh, I hate it. But luckily, we do now have access to sheldonite ore, which turns into plenty of sludge, but we get it from sieving. But I don't have to automate it yet, so that's nice. What am I doing with my life where this is more interesting than automation? Well, anyways, nitric acid is a whole lot easier to make inside of a large chemical reactor, since we can just combine all of the base chemicals instead of having to take multiple steps. That being said, inert metal mixture takes a really long time and does not turn into much ruthenium. And if we want an EBF's worth of stuff, we'll need 128 ruthenium, so I'm gonna be here for a really long time running the sludge to my machines. And after an even longer time than I expected, we can finally at least begin smelting our RTM ingots, but they take a really long time, so I'd like to work on EV energy hatches. Thankfully, we can blast up some tungsten steel, can you guess what it's made out of, which we can use to make the last ingredient for the extreme voltage energy hatch, the extreme voltage coil. Now, most of our EBFs can now run off of EV power, and I even isolated another EBF to overclock it to IV power to super speed the smelting of RTM. And then, we have a critical power issue. Like, base-ending power issue, the kind that shuts off our AE system and forces me to pull the plug on all of our EBFs just to keep things stable. And what follows is a desperate and futile attempt at making a new gem fuel called a diatron and special upgrades to my dynamos to stave off the lack of FE in our shriveling diamond supply. But after hours and hours of failure, I realized that nothing matters. Nothing actually matters but my defeat of the clean room. I have enough diamond backlog to last me a few hours, even more if I'm careful. It's just a small setback, a tiny mole in the system. I mean, if I whack it anyways, another will arise. So why don't we just ignore it and finish blasting the RTM and get ourselves a shiny new set of RTM coils, which we can add to our isolated EBF, and now have the power to smelt high-speed steel G. Only issue is we can't do anything we want with it until we have an IV assembler, but luckily, the IV metal is tungsten carbide. Very easy to make for us, and the wire is shellite, which is also a very simple blend of black bronze and signalum. Unluckily, assemblers take 4 circuits of their tier and need to be powered by a converter, which also takes 1 circuit of their tier. So we find ourselves in need of a whopping 5 IV circuits, and we have to make the microprocessor mainframes, which take 2 EV circuits and insane amounts of wires and resources. So I embark on an absolutely titanic circuit crafting bender, all while the timer of my diamond supply ticks in the background. I make stacks of HV and MV circuits and whittle down my supply of those until I manage to, after great time and expense, obtain all the microprocessor mainframes we'll need to simply make and power 1 machine. My God. Oh, and dyslexia side note, it's tungsten steel, not tungsten carbide. It's not my fault that my brain doesn't work. Well, anyways, while that smelts up, we can just work on some other resources like graphene and a new type of rubber for the electric motors. Yeah, platinum and tungsten cables are too good for regular rubber, so I need to make some silicon rubber. It's not as good as styrene butadiene rubber, but that's honestly for later. And thankfully, the large chemical reactor does make it plenty easy to produce silicon rubber, so we have more than enough to coat all of our various and expensive new wires. Graphene just requires us to make graphite, which we can get from diamond ore processing, and I do that at extreme voltage because why not at this point? I mean, it's not like microprocessor supercomputers are the second most expensive thing for me to make. But after all that smelting and crafting and processing and reacting, I can finally claim my prize of an IV assembler and power converter. Our last obstacle to HSSG coils is, well, HSSG. And the Greg gods doth smile upon me, as HSSG is made up of all resources that we already have automated. So it's just a matter of time to mix it up and toss it into an EBF, and at this point, I have mastered the art of waiting around. And I truly do wait around as I make 576 smelted and cooled ingots of the stuff, which I just jam right into my IV assembler with a bunch of tungsten-y bits, and out comes our wonderful new high-speed coils. And finally, my EBFs can run with speed unmatched, and I can pollute the air. I've won. But why do I feel so empty, unfulfilled? Was this just hubris? This entire time a mask for insecurity? Do I even hate the clean room? Should I even hate the clean room? Am I really to escape this floating rock with malice and warfare? No, I see it now. My base is in shambles. My power supply crippled. I've taken the wrong course. The only path to escape is clean. I'm running out of power. My war against the clean room crippled my diamond power supply, and now my entire base is at risk of shutting down, trapping me on this Skyblock world forever. I need to find a new power supply in this void world before my diamonds run out. And worse, I must atone for my sins against the clean room. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. What must I do? For our sins, we must repent. And by that, I mean the new update just came out and deleted Ender.io and the sieving mod that I was using. So basically, our entire base's infrastructure is gone. Well, I suppose if we wanted to be clean, we need a clean base, and what better time to clean stuff up than right now? It's somewhat of a tedious process, but I get to be replacing all the old conduit bits and bobs with new pipes and cables, and honestly, with very few issues, we get the base mostly running back at full capacity. I say mostly because our entire ore processing line has been deleted, and honestly, I think we've somewhat outgrown sieves and deployers. There is, however, a large sieve multi-block of insane power that converts a stack of sand, gravel, or blackstone into one stack of every resource that it sieves into. Very, very, very powerful. And the best part is it's made mostly out of tungsten steel casings. Mostly. It does require stress-proof casing, which are made of a fairly weird alloy called Maraging Steel 300, which has no dust recipe, no alloy smelter recipe. In fact, the only way to make it is to create an entirely new multi-block capable of turning dusts into molten alloys. Yes, indeed, it is time for the behemoth alloy blast smelter. In order for us to make the alloy blast smelter, we need some new alloys, a handful of esoteric ingots with weird names like tantalum carbide, HSLA steel, titanium carbide, and the very difficult to pronounce molybdenum you get it. We'll need a ton of these, honestly, and although they're not very expensive to mix and smelt, both of the mixing and the smelting takes a really, really long time. The mixing is just gonna take a while, but the smelting we can speed up a bit. Remember, we're children of the clean room now. I've shed my shawl of hatred, and now I see what we can gain from this. The smelting time of the ABS alloys can all be reduced by helium gas, something that we can get by being clean. So clean, in fact, that we clean the very air that surrounds us into its component parts. We'll need the cleanest multi-block aside from the clean room, a distillation tower made of clean stainless steel casings that rises high into the sky. Now, this guy needs 50 buckets of air to start, so we actually also need a high voltage input hatch, and it produces so much nitrogen at once that we'll also need a high voltage output hatch too. In fact, from now on, many of our multi-blocks will make so much fluid or items that we're going to need higher than LV input and output ports. Now, the distillation tower is an amazing machine. It can separate fluids and their component parts, but air is not a fluid. So we'll need a vacuum freezer as well in order to cool the air into liquid air and output that directly into the tower. In order to get the air, I want to use more magic plants, so I set up a small processing area for us to produce air and fire essence for now, and hook that into our applied energistic system, and then export the air essence into an essence burner attached to the vacuum freezer to generate gaseous air very quickly. And now we have infinite gaseous air into liquid air processing in our distillation tower that's separating it into tons of different gases, mostly nitrogen and oxygen, but there's a little bit of helium and argon in the air too. Very, very useful. Of course, the distillation tower makes so much per cycle that after just one craft, it's filled its largest output. So we need some way to store all of this stuff, and I love me some super tanks. But those need circuits, and I kind of want to make them at MV tier since, well, they're blue. And although we have access to cheap MV circuits, we're being clean. And the cleanest kind of circuit to make are sock circuits. No, not feet socks. SOCs, system on chips. Something we have had access to for a bit now, but I've been too distracted to pursue it. Socks are special wafer to chip that can make crafting circuits unimaginably cheap, and we can get our hands on sock LV circuits and convert those for cheap into MV circuits. We just need to make a yellow glass lens to engrave sock wafers, and then those are just cut up in a cutter. However, we do need an extreme voltage circuit assembler, not a high voltage one, and although we have all the IV circuits and EV components we need, we can't quite make the EV emitter. We need a quantum eye, which is an upgrade to our ender eyes, and those take radon, a gas that can only really be found in the air of the end dimension, which we can't get to. That being said, we can actually use the same process that we got regular air to get ender air with an essence burner, but the devs predicted this and locked ender air and nether air essence burning behind EV essence burners, which guess what? Take an EV emitter. So the only way to get my hands on radon is to go through the monstrously tedious process of making netherrack in the large chemical reactor, processing it down into into nether agglomeratio, and then converting that into 200 buckets of nether air. Then, I need to make end stone in the large chemical reactor, turn that into ender agglomeratio, and convert that with the nether air into 200 buckets of ender air. Why 200 buckets? Well, because each distillation of ender air requires 200 buckets. Lord, it is expensive and time-consuming, but alas, thus is the cost of cleanliness. And the nether and ender air distillation towers are just kind of taller versions of the air ones, so... Oh, they showed up. And there is our radon and quantumize and lovely EV essence burners and circuit assemblers. Well, being clean really does unlock a lot of stuff for you. Wonder what else I could do. Well, let's focus on the task at hand. LV sock circuits, baby. For literally just one sock, 2 bolts, a circuit board, and a pittance of wire, we can make 6 LV circuits, and so I make a full 6 stacks of them, because why not, and get all of those upgraded into MV. With that, MV super tanks are an absolute breeze, and we can have all of our new and tasty gases stored up in massive amounts. Man, I have been having so much fun being clean that, well, reality slipped my mind. We're not making nearly enough power to support these massive towers, and I've gone and crippled our supply by distilling all of this at once. Crap. Okay, well, off go the towers for now. Let's get back to the task at hand, ore processing. If I can just make a large sieve to get diamonds, we might be able to make things a little bit more stable. Luckily, though, our ender air expenditure was not completely in vain, as it provides loads more helium than regular air, and we're able to speed up our last few alloy blast smelter ingots right up. Though, to be fair, that radon junk took so long that we don't really have that much left to smelt, but still, speed is speed, and clean is speed, or speed is clean, one of those things. Anyways, now we have everything we need to make that heat-resistant plating required for an alloy blast smelter. And good God, is this one big boy. Look at all those coils, those heat vents, and fancy looking casings. Someone get me a glass, because I'm looking at a tall drink of multi-block. This behemoth can now smelt up our Meraging Steel 300, but good God, does it take a while, so let's just work on a side project. IV energy hatches. We'll need iridium in order to make the IV coils, and that we can extract from the rarest metal mixture byproduct of the platinum processing line. Combining that with hydrochloric acid makes iridium metal residue, and centrifuging that makes iridium chloride dust, which can then be reacted with hydrogen to get precious iridium dust. Now with iridium squared away, we do need the HPIC chips for the hatches, and those must be cut by an IV cutter. Oh, and the blade is only tungsten steel. Weird, these things usually have some kind of, laminated glass. Okay, there it is. Yeah, that takes a new type of plastic that we just do not have access to right now. Past me would rush right in, but today we're being clean. Yes, clean. So back to the task at hand. IV hatches are gonna have to wait. I can still overclock. Luckily, our Meraging Steel is ready to be cooled within the vacuum freezer, and that means we can go ahead and process it into proper stress-resistant casings and all the tungsten-y bits as well. All we need is the controller block. That's pure netherite. That's not good. Pure netherite needs ludicrous voltage technology to access that, and I barely have any insane voltage tech. I mean, don't get me wrong, I could get into ludicrous voltage right now, but I'd never make it in time before I ran out of diamonds. I don't think I can even rely on burning diamonds anymore. In fact, now that I say it, burning diamonds doesn't sound very clean. Could there be some other way? Some clean way? A clean path to power? While burning gasoline isn't the cleanest thing to do by far, it does require us to clean one of the dirtiest substances in the universe. Duckling's bane. Oil. But oil distillation isn't cheap. It requires hundreds and hundreds of clean stainless steel casings for the many distillation towers we'll need. And better yet, we need to actually get our hands on oil in the first place, which seems like a bit of a struggle considering the fact that there's nothing but void beneath me. But therein lies my victory. The void is black and bad for you, and oil is black and bad for you, and it turns out that indeed, the void is just pure oil, which we can see with the high voltage prospectors tool. It's all oil. I'm not sure how that works, but not all oil is made equal, and I want heavy oil since it gives loads more resources when distilled. Well, loads more heavy fuel, but that can be turned into pretty much anything else, so I want it. And it does take a bit of flying around, but soon enough our prospector detects some heavy oil deposits, and I can locate a chunk that has a nice, large supply of the stuff. It is a bit far from the base, and I have no desire to run a giant pipeline, so instead I craft up some blaze rods to turn into ender tanks, which work like ender chests, casts, but can be keyed with dye, and they store fluids. Now we need a fluid drilling rig, which is really easy and no issue to set up at all. It costs a measly amount of steel for us, and we can run it at 1 amp of high voltage power with 0 issues. Just chunk load it and have it export into the tank, and we've got black gold a-flowin'. Now on to the cleaning part. We need tons of distillation towers to pull it off. After all, oil is pretty dirty, and that means tons of EV circuits. So for the 100th time, I go on an EV circuit crafting bender and end up with 56 of the shiny fellas to tie us over. Now turning gross heavy oil into refined and ultra powerful high octane gasoline really does take a lot. So I end up crafting 7 distillation towers, many MV and HV energy hatches, and transformers, crackers, ME system components, and loads more logistical blocks to help us prepare for the monster task ahead of us. And hoping I have enough in hand to do this in one swoop, but let's be honest with ourselves here, it's time to begin the process. Now distillation is really fun, but it's also a lot of the same things over and over again, so I'll try to breeze past the next 4 hours of my life. First up is a 4-tall distillation tower to refine heavy oil into the sulfuric versions of heavy fuel, light fuel, naphtha, and gas, all of which needs to be desulfurized. Desulfurization happens in a chemical reactor where the sulfuric gases react with hydrogen to produce their cleaned version and some hydrogen sulfide, which is dirty, but I can store it for later use. Now, refinery gas and naphtha we make are pretty much base ingredients on their own, so they don't need to be processed further, but light and heavy fuel have a lot to do, but not before they're cracked, mate. You see, heavy and light fuel on their own are too dirty, they're only good for burning, but we can crack them, breaking them down into more usable chunks to turn them into valuable clean resources. For that, we need cracking multi-blocks. 3 of them for our line, and the first 2 both consume hydrogen, so I build them with an input connected to one another. That way, one can be fed heavy fuel and the other light fuel so that we can produce lightly hydrocracked heavy and light fuel. Our third cracker will be severely steam cracked heavy fuel, and steam is really easy to make in a fluid heater with our infinite water. So we have 3 crackers cracking 3 different fuels, but all of them need to be distilled. Our lightly hydrocracked fuels are both distilled in a 6-tall tower, and their main purpose is to make either a bunch more light fuel or to make stuff like octane, because go figure you need octane for high octane gasoline. Our severely steam cracked heavy fuel is distilled into 11 different resources, so an 11-tall tower, and it is producing us things like butane and butene and butadiene, which are, well, not the same thing. In fact, amongst these towers, we're making a decent supply of methane, ethylene, benzene, toluene, and other useful fuels and gases that we previously had little to no access to. But if you think this is the end of distillation, you're way off. Although we now have the refinery gas, naphtha, toluene, octane, and butene we still need acetone that comes from charcoal distillation. Yeah, that's right. Distillation towers are so clean, they can not only clean oil, but also charcoal. Well, charcoal byproducts. We'll need a pyrolyzed oven reacting logs and nitrogen to make charcoal byproducts, which we can distill in a 4-tall tower into a few useful things, but the one we're looking for right now is wood vinegar. Wood vinegar itself then gets its own distillation at 6-tall to produce some acetone and other useful resources, except for water for some reason. I have no idea how water makes it through the process of burning logs, but sure, it's in there. Now this is great and all, but we still don't actually have a supply of logs yet, so we need a new and surprisingly expensive multi-block, the tree greenhouse. It's weirdly huge and mostly made of steel. This behemoth just makes logs. That's it. It is pretty useful for us though, as it keeps our acetone processing alive. And now that we have this city skyline of stainless steel, I'm actually pretty proud of it. All the base resources for high octane gasoline running off of one 16 amp high voltage converter is pretty sweet. But let's get that guzzling flowing, because it's time. We'll need a large chemical reactor combining naphtha, refinery gas, acetone, and menthol to make raw gasoline, which can be reacted with toluene to become regular gasoline, and then sent into another large chemical reactor to be mixed with octane, more toluene, nitrous oxide, a reaction of nitrogen and oxygen, and ethyl tetrabutyl ether, a reaction of ethanol and butene that I can't pronounce. And with some final AE hookups, we have a fully passive supply of the best combustion fuel in the game. No joke, one craft of this stuff can burn for hours and hours inside of a combustion engine. And although high-octane gasoline will burn for hours, it only takes seconds to subscribe, since if you're this far into the video, I know you're not going to miss the next one. And even better, if you want a world download, well, now's your chance. We just passed 500 days in this world, so I'm making it accessible to all my supporters on Patreon, and soon after, channel members and Discord members, so get it while it's hot. Now, the type of combustion engine I want asks for LUV technology, so we gotta settle for a temporary setup of lesser ones, since I don't want a chance of burning our diamond supply out before we manage to hit ludicrous voltage. Now, 5 HV combustion generator should do the trick, and I can even add new flux storages to our flux network network to be able to buffer up to 600 million FE. But again, we're limited by ludicrous voltage technology. However, this time we've been clean. This time we have an energy base to stand on. Let's get crazy, baby. We need new circuits, ludicrous circuits, and nothing is more ludicrous than epoxy resin, I guess, since that's the base of the nanoprocessor tier of circuits. And being clean is already paying off, as it turns out almost everything we need for epoxy resin is a byproduct of high-octane gasoline production. The only thing we're missing is phenol, but guess what? Distilling wood tar, which we already get from wood vinegar, will net us a phenol supply as well as topping up our benzene and toluene. Now, epoxy must be made inside of a large chemical reactor, but honestly those are becoming really cheap by now. I decide to be extra clean and make a condensed and compact epoxy machine. So you be the judge if I pull that off. The first LCR needs to produce epichlorohydrin, which we can make by combining propene, chlorine, and hypochlorous acid, which is just water and chlorine, and it even makes some dilute hydrochloric acid that I can distill into the pure stuff and send right into our AE system. But we need a dry ingredient, sodium hydroxide dust, which we can get from electrolyzing salt water, and hey, we actually produce salt water from making epichlorohydrin, so we don't actually need to input any of that. But now that we have epichlorohydrin flowing, and our machine is definitely looking clean and compact, we still need to turn that into epoxy, which is even easier as we just have to pump in phenol and acetone as well as run that saltwater loop again for sodium hydroxide dust and distill some dilute hydrochloric acid that gets made as well. And then bam, liquid epoxy flowing in and accessible from a big stainless steel drum. The machine is... well, it works, and it allows us to make epoxy sheets into blank epoxy boards and finally etch those into wonderful epoxy circuit boards ready for nanoprocessing. But we have a ton of circuit crafting on our horizon, and these guys need some new resources. Up first, the cheapest high voltage circuits. We need nano CPUs, which will require us to treat existing CPU wafers. We'll need an EV reactor as well as carbon fibers, which I can grow in an autoclave using carbon dust and our new epoxy. And by combining CPU wafers, carbon fibers, and liquid glowstone inside of our EV chemical reactor inside of the clean room, we can produce blue CPU wafers that I guess are smaller. By cutting those into chips and combining them with various SMD bits, some wiring, and our new circuit boards, we have our first nano processors. HV circuits at a decent price. And better yet, upgrading those to EV is ridiculously inexpensive and can be done immediately, but IV wants a bit more, specifically NOR wafers, so we need to dye a new pink lens, which is as always annoying to get, but also pretty cute, so I don't mind it that much. Engrave, cut, assemble, and we have some very reasonably priced IV circuits in our hands. And now for LUV. It's nothing we don't already own, but they're monstrously expensive, so we'll definitely want to be careful in how many we make. Thankfully, all we need is a few to get ourselves a chemical bath, so I'm gonna stick to only making 4 of them. We still have plenty to do here though, like new rubbers, plastics, and alloys we need. And to start, I'd really like to finally have a supply of styrene butadiene rubber, as it's just the best rubber there is. And it's actually really cheap for us since we already have oil processing set up. And unsurprisingly, we just need styrene and butadiene, which we can get from ethyl benzene, and we already have a lot of butadiene respectively. Now, we do need ourselves some laminated glass here, since the IV mixer and many future machines require it. And for that, we'll need polyvinyl butyrol, which has plenty of tedious steps for us to get through. We're gonna need a lot of hydrogen for this, which sucks, since our topaz supply of the stuff is dried up completely in the wake of our base being deleted. But luckily, I can just electrolyze it out of water. Still, it's a bit of a bore to make, so vinyl acetate to polyvinyl acetate and the very fun to pronounce butyraldehyde, which combines with our polyvinyl acetate to make polyvinyl butyrol that can coat tempered glass into laminated glass inside of a forming press. This unlocks the IV mixer for us, which we'll need to make the rhodium-plated palladium alloy we need for ludicrous voltage machines. But we're waiting on some circuits to craft at the moment, so I turn my attention to making some polyphenol sulfide, a plastic we'll use to coat higher tier wires. It's actually very easy to make, as the fluid form of it is just benzene, chlorine, oxygen, and some sodium sulfide dust, so it's plentiful and able to be converted right into thin sheets. But if you thought these long and weird words were done, too bad, because my circuits are ready for the IV mixer, so now we get to say rhodium and palladium a whole lot. Oh, and look, it's 5 p.m. It's time for my magnetoid platinum processing line segment. Both rhodium and palladium come from different resources inside of the platinum processing line, so here we go again. Okay, well, maybe I'm being dramatic, as we have a decent supply of raw palladium, but rhodium really is an issue, because I may have trashed all of the rhodium sulfate that I made a few weeks ago. Whoops. And it really does suck, because you don't get a lot of it from processing inert metal mixture, and it doesn't turn into a lot of the rhodium goodness we need, but each rhodium dust does turn into a decent handful of the rhodium-plated palladium that we need, and with some argon, it takes a dip in Lake EBF and is then cooled in valuable and usable ingots. The LUV machine wire is niobium titanium, which is actually really simple to make, since titanium we have by the thousands, and niobium comes from an ore that we also have by the thousands. And all we need to breach into the LUV tech is the electric motors, pistons, conveyors, and robot arms, which seem to have a really weird recipe. It looks like you need to upgrade an IV version of the stuff with a data stick inside of a scanner? Okay. Well, a data stick is easy. It's just a circuit assembler craft with resources we already have, and save for some NAND chips, but you know the deal. Die, lens, laser cut, we're done. So what, I just put the pump in and the stick here and it makes another stick? Oh no. No. The data stick is just using an assembly line. I forgot about the assembly line. Oh, not again. Not another multi-block in my way. I can't afford another war. I can't do this. I can't make an LUV chemical bath in time. I failed. Wait, there exists powerful forms of each of the regular machines in Gregtech, ultimate beings of automation capable of performing multiple tasks at once, but they are also multi-blocks, and multi-blocks can overclock. If I can get my hands on the large washing plant as well as IV energy hatches, then maybe, just maybe, I can push it to its limits and access ludicrous voltage chemical bathing. I have to try. We need HPIC wafers to make IV energy hatches, which will require us to make the IV cutter and chemical reactor for both of them to live within the sacred clean room. We'll also need vanadium gallium and indium phosphide gallium, the first of which is painfully easy, but indium needs some coaxing. Galena and sphalerite need to be purified and then mixed with sulfuric acid to create indium concentrate, which then must be reacted with aluminum to extract the indium dust. It's honestly got miserably bad return rates, but it's the only way we can get indium, so what can I do? HPIC wafers are truly expensive for us, and it doesn't make it easier that they only cut into 2 chips, but we finally have them. The last little step we need for IV energy hatches is a bit more iridium, and we're all familiar with the platinum line now, yeah? So I'll skip it. And now, with multiple IV energy hatches finally assembled, I hold the key to ludicrous voltage power. I hope this works, but we're not ready for it yet. Although I torn it down as its energy consumption was too great, we need the services of the great alloy blast smelter again, and we may as well test out ludicrous power on it. We require watertight alloy to make the casings for the large washing plant, and only by the power of the alloy blast smelter can it be mixed, and running it at LUV is beautiful, really, true glory, but too glorious as it devours our energy buffer, so we'll need to be careful in running it for too long, which actually shouldn't be too much of an issue because at these levels of heat, recipes absolutely soar by. 38 seconds for a single craft with a helium boost. Ludicrous, baby. With all of our temporary power systems running full force, it's time to really push the limits of this base. Watertight alloy is cooled and pressed and lathed and shaped into watertight casings ready for their new multi-block master. And now we build, we hope. Oh, Greg gods, please allow me to overclock this to tier skip. Grant me this one kindness. It works. Oh my god, it actually works. Ludicrous voltage power right at my fingertips. We can do this. We can make pure netherite. But first we need debris dust, which we can extract from netherrack. I just need to macerate it into dust, extract it into agglomeratio, and then centrifuge it for tiny, and I mean tiny amounts of debris. Literally a 2% chance to get 1/9 of a debris dust. And for a large sieve, we need 16. So that's 7,200 netherracks processed. Huh. So I set up a quick automatic processing line, and thank God, because it takes literally an hour and a half to produce the 144 tiny debris dust that we need for one large sieve. But I'd like more than one large sieve, and as fate would have it, I actually do touch grass with my friends sometimes, so I just left my computer running as I stepped away from the Greg. Oh my god, that was terrible. Put me back, put me back. We have plenty of debris dust now, so we must purify it. First, packing up the tiny debris dust into full-sized ones, and then reacting it with a mixture of chlorine and fluorine to purify it into purified debris dust. But pure debris is not what we want. We want pure netherite. So here comes ludicrous voltage power. We need to mix ethane and chlorine for dichloroethane, and then that with even more chlorine to make tetrachloroethane, which our purified debris dust is bathed in at extraordinary amounts of power in order to produce 100% pure netherite dust. It's beautiful, and also egregiously energy expensive, so we better get through these things fast. They take a swim in the EBF, and out comes pure midnight black ingots ready for shaping into gears. And once I have 4 gears made of the purest form of the most powerful metal, we can finally assemble a large sieve. Oh, glory day to this monolith of tungsten steel, this behemoth of ore collection. With merely 1 stack of sand, this god of production will create 25 stacks of different ores. What opulence, what splendor. We did it. We finally did it. But there is much work yet to do if I should wish to escape. Much work indeed. What if you were stranded on a Skyblock island and the only way to escape forced you to complete crafting trees that looked like this? For the last 500 days, I've handcrafted everything, but no more. I need to automate everything if I am going to survive. But an auto-crafting network is only as fast as the amount of machines it has. Or is it? With ludicrous circuits now accessible to us, we can create the ultimate automation machines. Large multi-blocks enhanced with a parallel hatch, forcing one machine to act as many. But we are yet one item away from automating everything. Nether stars. To automate all things, we must first power many things, and right now we're still mooching off a diamond burning plant. It's time to upgrade our HV combustion engines into extreme combustion engine multi-blocks. So it's a good thing that we have plenty of tungsten steel prepped and our 4 LUV circuits ready to go, because I want to make 4 engines, and not only do they cost an LUV circuit each, but also hundreds and hundreds of tungsten steel for all of the casings, intakes, gearboxes, and dynamo hatches that we need to craft. It's so much crafting, in fact, that I make an IV extruder to speed up the process of manually making all the pipes and rotors. I cannot wait for this to be automatic, because it takes me over an hour to handcraft everything we need to make our newest and bluest power generation tower. I stack all 4 of the engines on top of one another, running into some multi-block sharing weirdness as I do, but eventually our tower of intakes and casing rises high and proud. But now the HV combustion engines are in the way of progress, so I must disconnect them, placing my base back on a limited power supply. We've got to go fast. In their place, a tower of vacuum freezers is erected, 4 of them, 1 for each of the engines, as each one will supply its adjacent engine with all of the liquid oxygen it needs to become oxy-boosted, quadrupling their energy output. And to cap off the tower, a brewery to make lubricant, which our engines will need to keep them spinning. Now all I have to do is run various pipelines and wire lines to connect the machines to an oxygen and high-octane gasoline supply, and route the large amount of resulting EU into a converter and our flex network. And after a small jumpstart, each one of these combustion engines begins to generate not 1, not 2, but 4 amps of IV power, meaning we're now creating 4 amps of LUV power infinitely. Yeah, that should hold us over, and enable us to reignite our entire air distillation setup, and round out our ore sieving machines as well, adding the remaining 3 that we're missing to now passively produce every single ore in the game forever. And even better, I get to remove our old sieves and upgrade our cobbleworks too in order to power our base into a new age of processing. And just as a treat, I spend some time upgrading our flex energy buffers to hold over 3 billion FE, because why not? And now our base finally matches our esteemed tier of technology. Well, without all that auto-crafting we're here for. We need IV emitters and sensors, which both take upgraded forms of nether stars, and many future machines will need those too, and a lot of them. So we want our nether stars to be passive, and they're made from 8 of each elemental charges, which means we need all 4 elemental powders: Blaze, Basal's, Blitz, and Blizz. And Basal's and Blizz powder require materials from the platinum processing line. It's time. Today, we automate everything, and that starts with platinum. we must passive the plat line. Time to prepare many circuits as well as a passive supply of sulfuric acid, which you use a decent amount of. And after prepping a few LCRs, we are ready and raring to go. Passive nitric acid is step 1 and pretty easy with our LCR friend. Just feed them nitrogen, hydrogen, and oxygen, all things that are found in the air and very safe to breathe, and together they make a really deadly acid. Chemistry's weird. What else is weird is the amount of time I lose running back and forth to my AE system, so I take a brief detour to create a wireless grid so that with the press of a button I can access my things from anywhere in my base. Well, anywhere within 48 blocks of my base. Our nitric acid needs to end up in 2 places, a chemical reactor making platinum group sludge and a mixer making aqua regia, which we can use a fluid pipe with an upgrade to round robin it. From plat sludge creation, we'll also make some sulfuric nickel solution, which can be separated into nickel and sulfuric acid, so that's a tasty byproduct. And now if you recall, the platinum group sludge turns into 5 different materials, all of which we need to process. So to move them all around, we're going to use the power of storage drawers to teleport them, but we've all seen the plat line a million times over by now, so why don't I cover it one last time through song? Raw platinum's electrolyzed into dust and chlorine. Raw palladium's reacted with some hydrochloric acid. Inert metal turns into ruthenium and rhodium, and sulfuric acid splits it into dust and sulfate. Ruthenium tetroxide and rhodium sulfate electrolyze rhodium sulfate for dust, and it makes some sulfur stuff for even more acid returns. Ruthenium tetroxide gets mixed up with carbon dust and makes CO2, which we can harvest carbon from. Rarest metal mixture makes iridium and osmium. Large chemical reactor filled with hydrochloric. There's a complicated loop to get our acid back and make the metals too. We'll need pipes and chemical reactors, distillation powers, way too many piping issues, kids. All of our acid and even some osmium and iridium metal too. Oh, and the sludge residue makes some gold and silicon dioxide, which is pretty cool too. Now we've got platinum, palladium, rhodium, ruthenium, and iridium and osmium all chugging away, which means we are more than able to craft up our first few nether stars. The powders are all made in a reactor, so I go ahead and make a large chemical reactor to process them all in. Each powder asks us to combine some dust with some gas, and it all just takes a while, so while they craft up, let's prepare a new multi-block that we're going to need to actually make the nether stars. The implosion chamber, a machine that can turn dusts back into gems, and the only way to convert the nether star dust we'll be making into actual nether stars. It's really easy to make, it's just a box of steel, but it must be fueled by explosives, which is the part that we don't have access to yet. I want to make some industrial grade TNT, so first we need the nitration mixture, a combo of nitric acid and sulfuric acid, and then we're going to combine toluene, polyethylene pulp, and sugar to make a substance called gel toluene. Not fun to play with or to eat, and by reacting the gel toluene with the nitration mixture, we get a really powerful bomb. So don't try that at home. Our powders are still crafting up, but that's fine because we're still missing some ingredients. To turn the powders into the charges, we need gunpowder and coal dust. Coal dust is real easy as we have coal by the thousands, and then gunpowder is just made of coal dust, saltpeter dust, and sulfur dust, which we also have by the thousands. And with our new explosive materials in hand, we can mix the powders up into many charges. But it takes 8 of each to mix into a nether star essence, and only about an 80% chance to succeed. And that nether star essence then gets bathed into radon to become a nether star shard, which is macerated into only a small pile of nether star dust. We need 4 small piles of nether star dust to make 1 full nether star dust, and we need 4 full nether star dusts in order to make 3 actual nether stars in the implosion chamber. But boy, are they beautiful. No wither required. Bathing our nether stars in more radon turns them into the highly useful quantum star that can make our IV emitters and sensors at last. But that took a while, and even with the plat line passive, it's really expensive to spend a stack of rhodium and a stack of platinum just for 3 nether stars, especially since you need 2 of them for 1 single parallel hatch. There is a different method though, one I had hoped to avoid, but it seems it is inevitable. Mystical agriculture. We can't grow nether star essence directly, but we can grow blizz, basalts, blitz, and blaze rods, but it will not be simple. We'll need to just about master mystical agriculture to pull it off, which means our setup needs to be way bigger than it is and probably moved. So I extract a few machines we're no longer using and begin to make a dedicated area of the base. And woe to the Create mod, as here I tear down the final remnants of the spin mod. May it rest in RPM. Behind the scenes, I'd been mixing up some nature essence as we're really gonna need it in droves, so with 16, we can make the seeds. And I even make some wood seeds just to have an additional supply, and I even vein mine a huge chunk of my AE Oh, shoot, I didn't mean to do that. Well, after fixing that mess, I decided to put the agricultural setup nearby the plat line passive and get to setting up our greenhouses. Our goal here is to make tons and tons of nature essence, as it can be extracted for a 1% chance at life essence. And 32 life essences can be centrifuged into all the essences for our elemental rods at varying low chances, of course. So we'll need 16 life essence to make seeds to grow, to more to centrifuge until we have 16 of the rod essences to make to grow, and more infinite nether stars. Yeah. Now all of that's gonna take a really long time, but luckily it's not just as simple as that, so we've got other stuff to do in the meantime. We need special essence fuels to grow the seeds and burning fuels to process the essences. To upgrade our current inferium essence, we need to use a special multi-block, and from there, we have a choice to duplicate them inside of an essence duplicator using weirdly named fluids, or we could just use more of the same upgrade multi-block, and it's faster to do that, and it's free. So yeah, we're gonna do that. They are big boys and kind of expensive, as it takes hundreds and hundreds of various casings to make, and we need 3 of them to keep a supply of the blue essence that we want. And after crafting oogles and boogles of steel casings, stainless steel casings, black steel frames, okay, it's mostly steel stuff, we have what looks like a chunk of a particle accelerator just lying around in our base. Each one of these essence upgraders will run at IV power, which will mean that they all run faster than their next step, so we can buffer each of the tiers of upgraded essences just in case we need them. The end of the line is Imperium Essence. It's blue and powerful enough to grow what we need, and now that we have it, we can now grow the seeds, but we need the fuel to process their outputs, and that is a lovely little substance called 2.2.2 Cryptand Lithium. What a name. And now, pronouncing words that barely count as language with D. Jojo the Owzo. To make our cryptand, we need to start with making glycol diamine dust, and for that, we need palladium on carbon dust reacted with triethylene glycol diazide dust. Oh, and just for fun, let's look at the EMI crafting tree for this. Great! Well, triethylene glycol can be made by combining oxygen, water, and ethylene in a large chemical reactor. Then we need potassium hydroxide, a combo of water and potassium. We'll want to make some sulfur dioxide and to add chlorine to it to make thionyl chloride. And then we take the thionyl chloride and mix it with toluene to make 4-toluene sulfinyl chloride, I think. Next, we can now take all that weird junk we made and combine it into glycol ditosylate dust. And that's not the end of the segment. Sodium azide dust comes from sodium dust and nitrogen gas, and that combined with the glycol ditosylate makes triethylene glycol diazide dust and sodium p toluene sulfonate dust. Now, palladium on carbon is at least as easy as it sounds, and sodium hydroxide comes from salt water as normal, which we can turn into soda ash with some added carbon. And now, the moment that I've finally been waiting for, soda ash, triethylene glycol ditosylate, and the triethylene glycol diamine to create 2 buckets of 2.2.2 cryptand. But it is not ready yet. We need to infuse it with lithium, which is an arduous process for some reason. And once we use the lithium-infused cryptand, it'll go back to being regular cryptand, so we need a proper loop. This is going to require some resource redirection, however, as we'll need lithium chloride to do this, and the only way to make that is through our tungsten passive line. But the problem is that the lithium chloride is used to resupply the system with chlorine to keep it running. So we need to reroute the lithium chloride and inject our external supply of chlorine into the system anew. Thankfully, aside from the lithium chloride, infusing the cryptand is a loop. We'll have a mixer outputting items into a chemical reactor, and that chemical reactor will output items right back into the mixer. These boys are going to trade lithium perchlorate and sodium perchlorate forever and handle the largest aspect of the infinite lithium infusion loop, and the chemical reactor will also make some salt water, which will break right back down into sodium to use with the lithium perchlorate to make the infusion work. And we even get a little cameo from the crate mod here, as I use it to regulate the input of lithium chloride. And look, I know about robot arms, I know I could have just used those, but I felt really bad for tearing down the crate mod, okay? And now that we're infusing cryptand, we don't have 16 life essence yet. What is the essence of life anyways? Is it just waiting around for life to grow around you? Is it watching it centrifuge away into dust and flame? Or is it the fact that I realize I can't use my 2.2.2 cryptand because that requires ZPM power, which I have 0 access to right now, and I had to create an entirely different fluid called 12 crown, and I even forgot to record it? Probably not. In fact, the essence of life is actually a bunch of weird rods, because that's what we get out of it. In order to process these essences, though, we need IV essence burners, and each one of those is going to require an IV emitter, so 1 nether star. So instead of using all of our nether stars right now, what if we make a system that cycles through each of the essences, burning them one at a time? But how? And where? And what machines to do it with? God, if only there was some kind of belt that could convey my items one at a time. And so the glorious return of the Create mod, forever feeding my essence burner one essence after the other in a beautiful march of rod-fueled power. And now to cement nether stars as the next automated item of my base. 4 mixers, 1 to make each charge, and those will need to be fed with coal dust and gunpowder. The coal dust is just coal in the macerator, but we're gonna need to process saltpeter ore into dust before we can do gunpowder. We can even pull out some valuable potassium dust by thermally centrifuging the saltpeter instead of just hammering it and washing it, so add potassium to the official DJojo list of passives, which is not a real thing. And now using some robot arms and clever IO setup, we'll make sure our mixers always have what they need inside of them to make my charges forever. We can use storage controllers to congregate all of those charges into one mixer that will forever combine them into that 80% chance of a sweet, sweet nether star essence, and from there, radon bath, macerate, packing, kersploding. Actually, put a pin in that kersploding part because we don't have any passive explosives, and I want a passive TNT. We can export polyethylene sheets and sugarcane into macerators to make the sugar and pulp that gets reacted with toluene for jailed toluene, the base of all good booms, and that is combined with my very infinite source of sulfuric acid to make ourselves TNT now and forever. And against all the odds, we have infinite nether stars. IV and above technology is busted wide open, and baby, that means parallel. Now that we have easy access to nether stars for quantum nether stars, we can taste parallel hatches, but each one rings up a cost of 4 ludicrous voltage circuits. And with quantum stars in hand, I feel somewhat inspired to progress to our next tier of circuit, the quantum circuits, cutting down our cost of LUV by quite a lot. And since we can now make the IV circuit assembler, nothing's in our way. Time to put a cat both in and out of a bag, superimpose possibilities stacked upon one another. Quantum processing. We'll still need nano CPUs to make these, but also their upgraded form, qubit CPUs, which are green, and that means better. We'll want plenty of qubit CPUs and nano CPUs, so we got to engrave a bunch of regular CPUs and start the arduous process of reacting them to upgrade them a bunch. So let's work on getting the reinforced circuit boards that we're gonna need. To make the base of the item, the reinforced epoxy sheet, we can just bathe cheap carbon fibers in epoxy resin, but we'll need copious amounts of annealed copper foil to turn them into circuit boards, so it might be time for a faster arc furnace. And good lord, does an IV arc furnace go absolutely nuts on copper. And while that goes, I start to bulk up a bunch more etching fluid. That'll take some time, so back to qubit CPUs. We need a good handful of quantumized, so let's bathe a bunch up right now. God, do I love radon.
For legal reasons, DJojo the Awesome does not love radon and urges all viewers to ensure radon levels are at an acceptable saturation within their homes. Remember, kids, radiation is only fun in Gregtech.
We also need some liquid gallium arsenide, which is not an issue for us, and with a stack's worth of eyes and liquid gallium arsenide, we can make 32 qubit CPU wafers just waiting to get cut. And while that runs, we can now etch our new circuit boards. It has to be in a clean room, and it takes a really long time. So I gotta sit here and wait. And by wait, I mean make endless swaths of SMD components and wires and circuits, but like half of that is waiting anyway, so it still counts. And I can count all the way up to 64, a full stack of LUV circuits right at our fingertips. And that means we can now begin automating everything. We'll want to work our way up to being able to autocraft even the highest tier of circuits. So we'll begin with the basics. Plates, wires, and machine parts each can be crafted from the stress-proof casing-themed large multi-blocks. The large wire factory, the large material press, and the large extrusion machine. And in the background of this video, secretly, I've been smelting loads and loads of ABS alloys in order to prepare for the army of multi-blocks that we'll be using. Each of the large multi-block controllers requires a matching machine at IV level, so we'll be slowly cannibalizing our IV line here. We'll start with the wire factory and material press, since I can wall share them easily, and since they're mostly just stress-proof casing, we're ready to go make our first parallel hatch and get to building. First comes the wire mill, and we'll be adding 5 input buses to it. Why 5 when wire mills typically only take 1 input? Well, each bus is set to a different crafting card with distinct buses enabled, and that will allow us to route materials into different buses for different crafts, from 1x to 16x wires as easy as that. Large material press over here gets 3 inputs for plates, double plates, and foils. But the extrusion machine takes the cake for inputs, as it doesn't care about crafting cards, but does really care about extrusion molds, and we'll want an input bus for each mold we use, every pipe, gear, and bolt. And with that, we've got all the stress-proof casing multi-blocks up and running. Well, not actually, because they're not powered and they're not hooked up to AE, but, you know, we still can't craft rods yet. Well, sure, we could craft them with the extruder, but lathe gang, rise up. Shockproof casings and cutting blades are needed for the large cutting saw, which can either be a lathe or a cutter, so we'll actually need another one of those later on. They take a red-looking form of hastelloy, which I managed to biff the math on crazy and just don't have enough of. So no problem, we can run the ABS at ludicrous voltage for a real quick smelt of even more. And in the meantime, I'll craft up a few more energy hatches. But the meantime doesn't last that long at LUV smelting times, and since we need to bend a bunch of ingots, we may as well test out our new 4x bender. And just look at the way it devours a stack of ingots. That is actually crazy. We can now make all the casings we need for our soon-to-be massive lathe, and with some ultimate gears made in our fancy new extruder, Clifford the Big Red Lathe lives. Everything from plates, wires, rods, and gears can now be made 4 at a time, all in one spot. Let's hook this thing up to AE. Now, auto-crafting with applied energistics is pretty great. You make a block called a pattern provider that needs to sit connected to the input of your machine. You'll fill it with patterns, which are instructions for items and fluids in and out, blueprints for crafting recipes. All the provider does is send a batch of items and fluids when the system requests it. Hot tip, when adding your pattern providers to your world, name them in an anvil first. Even add the crafting card number to their names, and it'll be so much easier to sort them. Now, pattern providers do the sending, but crafting CPUs do the thinking, and they're made of 2 parts, the crafting coprocessor and the crafting storage. More coprocessor sends more actions at once, and more crafting storage means more steps that can be taken. But the storages take storage components, and I want big, fat 256K ones, so why should I craft those manually when I can just craft those automatically? Yes! This is the perfect time to showcase auto-crafting. Crafting table recipes are done inside a machine called the molecular assembler, which of course is attached to a pattern provider. And in order to make patterns, we need a pattern encoding terminal and some blank patterns. Encoding is really easy. Click the recipe from EMI and hit the arrow, ta-da! We can even remotely send the patterns into the right terminal from a pattern provider access terminal. Here I'll use an extended one, as all my providers are of extended versions. Now, even though I don't have crafting CPUs made, so I can't actually auto-craft, I can still schedule the craft in my system and see all the bits I'm missing. Oh yeah, there we go. Just need a few more circuits, which come cheap, and we're actually missing some important machines for our basic crafts. The furnace and alloy smelter, which I forgot about completely since we've pretty much already had them. Yeah, the multi-smelter from ages ago is the large furnace/alloy smelter. You get it really early, and it doesn't parallel with parallel hatches, it parallels with higher tier coils, so it's really overpowered. And easy peasy to link up to the auto-crafting system. Just need some pattern providers. After some last bit of manual crafting, I make up a 256K crafting storage block and a coprocessor to boot. Our first CPU is live, our auto-crafting empire begins! But we must automate everything, and what better way to fill in the gaps of our auto-crafting than to make it up as we go? Pattern on pattern, multi-block on multi-block, the world around me begins to move autonomously. Naturally, the assembling factory should be our next goal, as wires, rods, and plates are pretty useless on their own, and an assembler is needed to coat, shape, and craft loads of parts. Now, before you get too excited on me, assembling factories and circuit assembling factories cannot be overclocked like the other large multi-blocks, so no tier skipping for Rudy Jojo. Still, there is no reason not to unlock the potential of parallel assembling. But we do have an additional challenge with our assembler here. Fluids. Up to this point, all we've needed to input are items, but now there are recipes that expect both items and fluids, and we're gonna have to get kind of creative here. Or we could just passive a supply of common fluids in the machine at all times and never have to worry about it. So I'll just add a nice fluid cell to our AE drive and get cracking on with the assembler build. Easy peasy, because we have all the parts and bits we need for it, but those pesky fluids are still in our way. And what are those fluids, you might ask? Well, nothing but the dubious plastic pentuple and the slithering styrene butadiene rubber. That's right, it's time to revisit our passive polyethylene, polyvinyl chloride, polytetrafluoroethylene, and to add 2 new plastics to the passive mix, polyphenol sulfide, and the most advanced plastic we have access to, polybenzimidazole. And yes, it really is pronounced like that. But let's start simple. And by simple, I mean ripping out established infrastructure for something better. Polyethylene needs ethylene, and boy is it slow the way we do it, but thankfully we can juice up some butene with steam and extract enormous amounts of ethylene from it. Just one more cracking unit and a cute little 3-tall distillation tower nets us a 1.5 buckets of ethylene every 6 seconds. Woof. With ethylene being made directly, polyethylene is extremely easy to passive. Just slap some oxygen on it. Next up, PVC. One chemical reactor adds chlorine to ethylene for vinyl chloride, and another adds oxygen and polymerizes it to make polyvinyl chloride. Good for making anime figurines, pipes, and chlorine gas if you're not careful. Up next is the chemically inert polytetrafluoroethylene, or PTFE, or go to hell. Before, we needed a magical blend of chloroform and acid, but now we can just use a large chemical reactor to make the tetrafluoroethylene from methane, chlorine, and hydrofluoric acid. And as is the case, these bonds are looking pretty monogamous. Domain expansion! Polyamory oxygen! With that taken care of, let's take a quick break from the plastics and pass it up the queen of rubber, styrene butadiene. Reacting ethylene and benzene makes styrene, and combining that with butadiene from our distillation makes raw styrene butadiene rubber pulp, dusted up with some sulfur, and blammo, good rubber. Now is a good time to route our new plastics and rubber into the assembler, as they'll allow us to coat our wires and make our machine holes. And after a quick repair during a test, we can now make things like MV item buses with no manual crafting on my end. Sick! Well, let's make sure we have everything ready. Polyphenol sulfide is used in coating even higher tier cables. Sulfur and sodium mix for sodium sulfide, and chlorine and benzene make dichlorobenzene. And with just a bit of fluid and item routing business, we're making polyphenol sulfide, baby. And now for my final trick, the old razzle polybenzimadazzle. This baby is the cheapest plastic to use for buses and carbon fibers, and is required for the large mixer and advanced SMD components, and becomes a required material for higher tier machines. And it is no short order. We need to make diaminobenzidine and diphenoisophthalate. Side note, isophthalate is spelled with a PH, but it's silent. What? Why? Literally, why? That is the worst and ugliest rule in the English language. I can't imagine. Why is it not isophthalate? But no, it's isophthalate. Anyways, diaminobenzidine is up first, and for that we'll want to steal access to the nitric acid we're mixing back at the plat line. That nitric acid gets combined with sulfuric acid for the nitration mixture, then we'll make some chlorobenzene from, I'll let you guess, and combining it with the nitration mixture from earlier nets us nitrochlorobenzene, which gets routed right into a large chemical reactor alongside copper dust and hydrogen to make dichlorobenzidine, which is not the final step. It only sounds and looks like it, as we need a dose of ammonia and the presence of zinc dust to convert into valuable diaminobenzidine. Now up to bat, diphenyl isophthalate. We need to make some phthalic acid, and again, it's the same thing with a pH, which is great because we already make part of the recipe, dimethylbenzene from distillation, but we still need some potassium dichromate dust to make it all the way. We need to combine chromium and oxygen for a very dangerous dust, and then that with potassium for potassium dichromate dust that nets us our phthalic acid when combined with dimethylbenzene. And it just takes a little bit of sulfuric acid on the top to finalize the creation of diphenyl isophthalate. Just one more large chemical reactor to combine two ingredients into lovey-dovey polybenzimadazzle juice. God, that was a ride. Well, into the assembler it goes, and we are ready. Ready for what? More machines! We can now make the large mixer and might as well join it with a maceration tower and extraction machine too, so that we can make any dust, any liquid that we can dream of. Our mixer needs a new alloy we haven't messed with yet called osmium-iridium, the combination of osmium and iridium, go figure. And it's a job for LUV smelting, so our EBF goes into overdrive. And with auto-crafting at our fingertips, it couldn't be easier to make the multi-block controllers and casings. Setting up the large mixer is a real treat though, as again, we need to be conscious of items and fluids, and unlike the assembler who mainly uses 4 or so fluids, the mixer wants just about anything, and pattern providers require one single output source. So we need to somehow trick the provider into outputting into multiple fluid sources and item sources. Thankfully, we have a little mechanic of applied energistics called subnetting, a method of creating a mini network attached to your main one. We can take our pattern provider, connect it to the main network, and we place an interface looking into it. Now the interface is offline at the moment. We'll need to power it by connecting it to the pattern provider through cables, beginning with the quartz fiber cable that will power the interface but not connect it directly to the network. But because it's an interface, it can see the entire network. Now we just equip it with some storage buses attached to our inputs and outputs and subnet. Now this is going to allow us to autocraft anything, anywhere, at any time. And for the mixer, we give it card none, 1, and 2. And thankfully for my brain though, the macerator and extractor are 1-in, 1-out machines that just need plain old pattern provider setups to work. What would be nice though is a polarizer of some kind. Oh, and look at that, we can make a big one. And although it needs some blue seal, we can easily craft that up by encoding all the patterns needed into our macerator and mixer. I need to run around doing a little bit more circuit crafting and osmium smelting, but soon our large electromagnet is alive and ready to polarize. And boy am I tired at crafting circuits on my own. own. But adding them to auto-crafting is a big ask. Not only will we need a chemical reactor, laser engraver, cutter, and circuit assembler, but all of those will need to be within a clean room. And considering these huge machines are huge, we'll need a huge clean room. And that's gonna take a lot of plasticrete and clean room glass. So why did you think I made the mixer, extractor, and macerator together? Well, because they're gonna make concrete and liquid glass production automatic. So all of our clean room blocks will just fly out on my request. I plan for our new Giga clean room to overtake our current one, so I want to make sure that I have everything set up before tearing down the current one, as I wouldn't want to run out of circuits and be stuck, now would I? So pattern, and another big smelt of an alloy to shore up the supplies for our laser engraver. I kinda guessed at how much cleanroom supplies we'll need. I feel like 2 stacks of plasticrete and 4 stacks of cleanroom glass might be good, but I guess we're gonna find out. I start with the frame of a 10x10 cleanroom setup, which should maybe be enough room, but the only way to know is to fill it with machines. Let's do the laser engraver first, it looks cool. Big ol' box of redness that I stuffed with 10 input buses, 1 for each different lens that we use, and the build is really simple considering its shape, which is a good thing, because I definitely should not have built it first. I should have built a circuit assembler on the ground and had this one above it, so down it goes, and I replace it with a circuit assembler. Then I put the cutter on top of it, and there's no way I can fit the laser engraver and chemical reactor in the way that I want, so we'll need a bigger cleanroom. In fact, just assume that the size of the cleanroom continues to get larger and larger because I keep underestimating the quantity of blocks you need to make it. But after some tinkering, we can now jam all of our machines in there, and sadly the large chemical reactor doesn't actually parallel. In fact, I don't think there is such a thing as a paralleled chemical reactor. It is pretty sad. But we can get all of our machines cuddly, snugly fit inside. It's time to make them comfortable by boxing them in the walls of glass and ceilings of filters. And as for routing power into the giant clean room, I'll just use flux networks. I mean, we don't need to do anything with input holes, except for AE, which can come through input holes. It takes a lot of fussing with spacing and cables and interfaces and such, but after a while, we have all the providers set up. Circuit crafting is now at the tips of our fingers. But just the tips, because we still don't have advanced SMDs. We're gonna want them for advanced circuit crafting, because for now they're cheaper options and later will be a requirement. They're not going to be the easiest to encode recipes for since they require some pretty intense EBF tier materials. Oh yeah, we need the high-speed steels, G, E, and S, to make all the SMDs as well as an indium, gallium, vanadium, chromium, molybdenite, graphite, and tungsten steel passive supply. Yep. We have our work cut out for us. Our current EBF line is fine, and I don't really want to tear it down, so we're just going to start a new one off to the side and tear down the old PTFE plant to make some room for other machine lines. I bulk craft 9 EBFs, but we don't have enough HPIC chips to actually make 9 IV energy hatches, since we're out of indium, so let's get that on the passive floor. We'll need 2 ore washers, one purifying galena, the other sphalerite, which we can send into a mixer to combine with sulfuric acid into indium concentrate. That concentrate is reacted with aluminum dust to make us some nice, clean indium dust and some trash byproduct that I do not care about. Well, that should be it. And it looks like energy hatches are back on the menu. So back to the EBF at hand. We're a bit behind on our passiving journey, so let's get tungsten, tungsten carbide, and tungsten steel all smelting passive, as we just have a huge need for those buggers. Way more tungsten steel, but the others have their uses. All that goodness is routed into the EBFs, who split their outputs back into AE system to get sent into a vacuum freezer. No drawer storage here, as we'll be relying on levelometers to control the smelting limits. I also make sure to buffer a stack of the tungsten steel and tungsten carbide dusts, because who knows, it could be useful. Oh wait, I know it's useful, because HSSG dust needs tungsten steel. Their mixer setup is real simple, of course, but HSSG is hungry for resources we don't have passive, vanadium and molybdenum. But as luck would have it, we have access to an ore processing multi-block made entirely from tungsten steel. Good news, as I have that passive now. Bad news is that it takes a lot of tungsten steel, and I can only begin to make this weird looking base for them. C'est la vie with passive machines, all you need to do is wait. And wait, I do, but only long enough to make one of them because it's boring. I want to process molybdenite ore into molybdenum dust, but we'll need a passive supply of sodium persulfate if we want to do that. So we gotta automate combining salt and sulfuric acid to make sodium bisulfate, and then electrolyze that into our tastium sodium persulfate. And the machine also makes an oddly sick beat for some reason. And now we can begin molybdenum processing. and enough time has passed that we can afford even more machines. Bauxite with sodium persulfate to make gallium and rutile, tantalite with sodium persulfate to make niobium and manganese, but after firing up all the ore processors, I'm missing one. We need cobalt too, which is distilled water and cobaltite, so I take a quick water distillation detour, and our AE system is filling up with cobalt processing power. We'll need vanadium processing as well, but we're well out of tungsten steel, and it's easy enough to craft up a stock of vanadium at the moment. So let's make some high-speed steel, baby. HSSE is a blend of HSSG, cobalt, manganese, and silicon, and HSSS is an entirely more expensive blend of osmium, HSSG, and iridium. Passiving them is easy peasy, but cooling them presents a new challenge. They're so hot that we need liquid helium present to cool them down. So we're going to need to upgrade our freezing setup. Moving it to a new spot for a change and adding our first upgrade is easy enough. Tag-based item exporters. Now, instead of manually coding the exports myself, anything tagged as a hot ingot will end up right in the freezer. Our next boost is to overclock it to ludicrous voltage for added speed, and lastly, a second freezer right next to it to cool down helium and send it into the main freezer. Although the system's backed up a bit after being off for so long, it will definitely catch up and then some. Last little bit we need is passive graphite, which is really easy to make from diamond dust with just 2 machines. And while making the graphite passive, I run into the high voltage macerator of doom. It crashes my game multiple times. But it's all worth it in the end, as now we have nearly everything passived for advanced SMDs. Nearly, because certain ingots like vanadium, gallium, and palladium I just don't need passive right now. So instead, I'll make an isolated EBF for use in AE autocrafting. Oh yeah, now there's no limits. Well, there's one limit. When encoding the EBF recipes, we can't leave them as default since hot ingots aren't used for anything, so we'll have to change the recipes to expect the cooled, usable ingots. And after a quick test, I verify that we can now autocraft every single advanced SMD part. Now to encode all the recipes we need for quantum circuits. Merely a few machines lay in our path to craft, so let's call them as we see them. Like a chemical bath to make reinforced epoxy sheets, an arc furnace for annealed copper ingots, and an autoclave for carbon fibers. And with that, we have every pattern and passive needed to demand the craft of any quantum-themed circuit. So just for fun, let's ask for 16 quantum mainframes, the ZPM tier circuit. But just look at those machines light up as they kick on, and god, those crafting steps are insane. Don't get me wrong, there are improvements I can make. Larger buses on the circuit assembler to force more bulk crafts, better parallel hatches down the line, but nothing beats 16 ZPM circuits deposited into my pocket with no more than a press of a button. Finally, everything can be automated, unless it requires an assembly line. Whoops. My base's power demands keep expanding infinitely, so I'll just have to expand my power infinitely. But trapped up here in Skyblock means I have limited resources. Or do I? I still have the sun. The infinite beaming power of the sun itself is what I will harvest in order to power my base into a new age of technology. But in order to make the ultimate Solar Panel 6 powerful enough to harvest ludicrous amounts of energy, I'll need ludicrous voltage energy hatches, which all of my current machines are too weak to produce. So we're going to need help from a new multi-block friend. The time for the LUV assembler is here, and that means we'll need the power of our friend the assembly line to create the microparts needed to craft it. No longer are mere assemblers powerful enough to create the ultimate tier resources we need. Only the power of the multi-block made from nether stars can achieve our goals. But with our new auto-crafting setup, all we'll need to do is encode recipes for the various bits, bobs, and bolts needed for this guy. Laminated glass, however, is a bit of a detour for us because we need the forming press to make it, and I don't want to make a new material press multi-block for it, so I'll just quickly add a simple IV tier forming press and pattern provider setup to accommodate it. We also need to encode all the recipes for the plastic sheets it uses, and that requires me to add a new large chemical reactor to the automation floor, as we need to account for crafting circuit number 2. And then I discover there's a recipe bug in that you can't make tempered glass inside of a large arc furnace for no reason whatsoever, so we have to use our EBF instead, which sucks because it doesn't parallel and it's a lot slower and and we're less than 5 minutes into the video and glass is already a problem. Well, assembly lines are a real special multi-block as they refuse any input ports larger than ULV, which only have one slot. So if a recipe needs 5 different inputs, the assembly line needs to be 5 inputs long. So I'm gonna play it in the middle and go for 10 inputs. That should be enough for a while, I think. And good God, is this expensive. In fact, we're even missing patterns and passives that we need, like a supply of neodymium, very important for the future, so I hacked together another ore processing factory running barium and sodium persulfate to net us loads of neodymium. Also, the tag-based exporter on our freezer broke for some reason, so that sucks, but I'm sure I'm not going to have to fix that in the most menial and annoying way later. Our biggest bottleneck for the assembly line craft is the EBF, of course, slow thing as it is, so I've got some waiting around to do. Oh.
Honey?
Yeah?
It's been days.
It's been Gregtech. Okay, we've hit ourselves a bit of a snag. Assembly lines need a special input called a data access hatch to run their recipes. You see, we need to research recipes and encode their data into the assembly line before it can use them, and the data access hatch must be made in an assembler inside of a clean room. Our big assembler is well outside of our clean room, so I need to whip together a new single assembler and jam it into the IV lines inside of the clean room just to make a glorified USB drive. I love you, Gregtech. But with that out of the way, we can finally begin to work on our newest friend, Sir Assembly of House Line. This monster machine is made up of Nether Star powered casings, overclocked to LUV power, and equipped with 10 item inputs and 9 fluid inputs, sleek laminated glass, and of course, a new age data hatch to store up 9 whole recipes worth of data. Yeah, only 9. Did I mention this is not the only assembly line we'll be making today? And in order to run this guy with AE auto crafting, we need to treat every single one of its inputs as a large subnet. But of course, do I manage to make it work? Probably not, but let's find out. The first thing we have to craft is the LUV electric motor, so first we gotta research it. For now, research is pretty easy. We just need a scanner machine and a data stick, and to learn about the LUV component, we just pop in the IV component. So data stick and IV motor go in, data on the LUV motor comes out. Then that data goes into the data hatch, and we can encode the recipe and apply it under logistics. LUV is monstrously expensive. In fact, we're even missing a vital metal for it, Sumerian, which we can only get through centrifuging rare earth. And there's only a tiny chance of getting 1/4 of a dust anyways. So it's kind of a good deal that we already have quite a lot of rare earth lying around from previous ore processing. And after blowing through 4 stacks of the stuff, we don't even have a stack of samarium. So that's gonna need a passive at one point, but that's for future DJojo. For now, we can send the craft through our first LUV motor, and it doesn't work. Okay, well, it's got all the items and fluids and... Oh, right. The assembly line is really picky, and it needs its inputs to be in order from front to back. Okay, we can change all the priorities on the storage buses to force the items to come out in order. Also, side note, if you're doing the assembly line, make sure to output from the assembly line back into the pattern provider and then use the pattern provider's crafting block. It'll help you. And while I get to test the assembly line a second time, guess what? I get to fix the freezer in the most tedious and menial way possible, since tag exporting just doesn't work anymore for no reason. Well, at least the assembly line works now. Hello, new friend. And if we can make motors, we can make just about everything else. So let's get that LUV assembler in our hands. Just got to encode a pattern here and here, sign on the dotted line, wait 20 minutes in real life, and bam! LUV assembler, baby! Can't use it if it isn't powered, so we'll need to smelt up some twinnite ingots, which I'll use the ABS for, since it'll make the molten form of them in bulk and free up my EBF for other things. It's made of simple dusts that we can easily auto-craft, and with a puff of helium gas for heat, we can just leave those little ingots to bake for a bit. Just long enough to snatch a 4 amp LUV converter for the quest book, which is more than enough to power just the assembler, which we'll be using to make one single item, and then never again. A ludicrous voltage coil. Well, 2 of them. With these in hand, we can now make LUV energy hatches. Slotting one into our large assembler powers it into LUV, and now we can autocraft the coils, which means we can autocraft the energy hatches. So I make 2 more and push them into our ABS to power it at ZPM, unimaginable heat, and speed, and energy consumption. Right, the whole reason we're doing this. Solar panel 6. We're already down 20 billion units of power from our bank, so I better get to encoding the recipes we need fast. And to upgrading our machine line to LUV for even more speed at crafting. I gotta disconnect the ZPM power from the ABS because it really is excessive, and I'd really like to stop blowing up my IV energy hatches too. That would be nice, so nice. But after a few more upgrades, including a ZPM powered EBF, we can begin the craft of our first solar panels. 4 of them will make 1 full amp of ZPM power for us, which is about 600,000 FE per tick. The craft, however, is going to take a really long time. The solar panels need a part called an energy core or something like that, and they need over 30 real-life minutes in the polarizer at the tier of power we're using right now. So I'll make it a mental goal of mine to get ours to ZPM power to quarter the time that they'll take. I used this insanely boring moment to craft up a massive rhodium-plated palladium smelt, as it's the LUV metal, and passive some lava and liquid blaze, since I really should have done that from the start. I don't know why it took me this long. And still, it takes ages to finish the craft, but in the end, we end up with 4 beautiful solar panel 6s. Even just these 4 little blocks push us from 60 billion units of power in the red to profiting 500,000 power per tick. Now, we can afford to push the rest of our machine line to LUV, a massive speed increase to things like HPIC wafers and circuits. With all of our machines at LUV, well, we're still far from our goal. Sure, we have lots of power now, but it's not infinite. I can't just request a stack of these whenever I want. It'll take way too long, and we barely have the resources to support it. If only there was a way to speed things up. If only there was a way to go even faster. Well, we could, but we need ZPM tier. If we could heat our EBFs up even more with better coils and power them even harder with better energy hatches, their bottleneck would fade away. In order to achieve ultra voltage power and crazy hot trinium coils, we'll need to create the fantasy metals of Nequata and trinium. The Nequata processing line begins! I shore up our solar panel supply to support the power requirements we'll meet, and even do some shopping for multi-block hatches. I then clean up the area nearby the agricultural setup to use as a site for the Nequata processing line. It begins with a large chemical reactor that takes in an item in a fluid and has 2 fluid outputs, and I'd like the setup to be relatively clean, so I end up placing and breaking the LCR a few times to get the alignment perfect, just the way I want. And we end up with 3 large chemical reactors, each outputting into another, working together to combine hydrogen and fluorine for hydrofluoric acid, and then combine hydrofluoric acid with antimony trifluoride to make fluoromantic acid, and then fluoromantic acid with Nequata dust is the final LCR step and the core of the Nequata line. But before we can do any of that, we actually need antimony trifluoride, which thankfully is very easy to make and fully recyclable. So once we combine the fluoromantic acid and Nequata, we get 3 things. A dust that can be smelted into titanium, impure enriched Nequata solution, and impure Nequadria solution. The 2 solutions eventually get processed into their respective ingots, as well as tritium ingots and a supply of indium phosphate 2 through a series of centrifuging and distilling and sending liquids around. And all of this is powered by some elegant applied energistics connections. Interface spam. With this somewhat compact knot of machinery, we have the Nequata line fully passived, but no dice on smelting it, as tritium, enriched Nequata, and Nequadria need higher tier coils than we have to smelt. Nequata coils is the next step in coil technology, which we'll use to be smelting trinium and enriched Nequata. And thankfully, they're actually pretty cheap, just needing a smelt of good old Nequata dust, which we have in droves, and so that gets a little dip in the EBF. We'll also need some more energy hatches, converters, and of course the coil, so I've got some waiting around to get to. Thankfully, my editor is about to do a super cool transition to convey the passage of time. Once our hatches and coils are done, 2 more EBFs hit the factory floor, one smelting zinc dust and trinium sulfide to make uber important trinium ingots, and the other smelting the enriched Nequata sulfate to make us enriched Nequata. Our energy consumption is now completely uncontrolled, so I do need to put a few more solar panels on the line, and, well, now there really isn't anything we can do until we have a bunch of tritium ingots. Yes, trinium is the key to all things going forward, I fear. Trinium will be our greatest bottleneck. Well, there is actually one thing we can do. In order to make the ZPM energy hatches I desire, regular scanners are not going to cut it for research. We'll need the research station, a complex multi-block that we should be able to craft up, I think. But you know what they say, the only way to learn is to cause massive radiation. Yes, to make the research station, we need our hands on a steady supply of uranium, which means we have to process pitch blende ore. By electrolyzing pitch blende dust, we can get our hands on uraninite, and uraninite combined with hydrofluoric acid and fluorine makes us a substance called uranium hexafluoride. We can spin that down into enriched uranium hexafluoride and depleted uranium hexafluoride. The enriched uranium hexafluoride gives us ultra radioactive and completely useless uranium-235. We want the depleted depleted stuff, just regular old uranium, which is the only one that can be used in our alloy. And before we make our research station, I'm gonna craft an LUV sensor right on its own for quest completion purposes, and then turn that sensor into an LUV scanner. But we're not gonna scan anything with the LUV scanner. Instead, we're gonna scan the LUV scanner to learn about the research station. So, actually, hopefully we don't need to use that later. Now, the research station needs an assembly line to make, and our current one is running out of space in it, so I gotta make another one. Well, that wasn't fun to do again, but it sure is handsome next to its sister. And then we can fill it with our research and begin to encode patterns, and then the roadblock. The research station needs ZPM parts. ZPM parts need europium. Europium. A metal so fantastic, it requires a particle accelerator to synthesize. That is going to be expensive. Like all good things, the Mark I reactor requires a load of recipes to be encoded, and we even get to add in the Naquata tier of silicon wafers to get things ready. And
Narrator.
Jesus,
Narrates
narrator
all.
jump scare. Oh my god,
Game
no
menu.
idea how I did that.
Use
but I
mouse
was locked
cursor
in
or
so
tab
hard, and that
button
just
to select
narrator.
element.
Narrates chat.
Options.
Ugh, scared the hell out of me.
Access.
It interrupted me adding a parallel ore washer to the processing line to make getting Certus quartz automatable. I'm not sure why I didn't passive it, but I don't know, I'm tired. We still need borax from salt processing, so in goes another ore factory breaking down salt ore. And after encoding so many recipes that I can feel my brain internally swelling, we're still not able to make a Mark I reactor, because of course we need plutonium to make this thing. So we gotta go make a nuclear power plant, let's go baby! The reactor recipes are pretty cheap for us actually, as we're well past the progression step for it, but while making it we run out of hydrogen. Ugh. Fine, alright, we'll see if I ever run out of hydrogen again after I add a parallelized electrolyzer running at ZPM power, splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen. That should do it. Anyways, nuclear reactor time. Bam! It's a big old box. It'll make power for me, but I don't care about that because I already have power. What I want is plutonium, which of course we get from uranium. We can make uranium fuel rods in a canner and run those in the reactor with some distilled water, which will eventually spit out depleted uranium fuel rods, which I probably shouldn't be holding in my bare hands. But if I spin them around at massive speeds, we can get 4 plutonium dust out of it, which need to be spun down again for a small chance at producing plutonium-241, which we'll need 2 of. Who knew spinning around was so productive? In short order, we've got our 241 that we need, and now we can finally make a Mark I reactor after handcrafting some phosphorus dust and, oh right, tritium. Yes. The reactor is expensive, like really, really expensive, and by my math, I need to wait a few more real-life hours before I have enough tritium. So I may as well queue up a stack of solar panels and then just, I guess, take a nap. Greg reactor. Oh, it's done. Ding! The parts are here. And it's a pretty annoying one to build, so I'll use the terminal to instantly... Okay, never mind. I'll build it by hand. Oh, and I can just taste the europium. Well, actually, I probably shouldn't, but wiring and piping this thing is a project, as it has 16 energy inputs, fluid inputs, and fluid outputs, all of which want to be one big happy family. And after jamming this into applied energistics, we can request our first batch of europium, and it works! Ooh, it works too well. Okay, don't stand inside of the particle accelerator. Man, that's my first death on this world. But also our first ingot of europium in this world too, and that removes a final roadblock to entering ZPM tier technology. Research begins on ZPM tier microparts, as does recipe encoding. And god is it satisfying to watch my crafting line light up as we queue an entire ZPM assembler in just one click. Just look at that assembler go. We'll also want a converter for the assembler, which wants dragon steel wires, a blend of twinite and shellite that takes pretty damn long time to smelt, but once it's done, we can finally power the assembler and create 0-point module coils, the final ingredient to ZPM energy hatches. Oh, well, and I also need to research them. Right. High-tier research is a multi-step process that I admittedly didn't really know how to do, but what I did know is that I still needed to encode more recipes, and that we're running out of assembly line space, so methinks I'll juggle the data sticks for the crafts we need. Unlike the simple scanner blocks, the research station must be fed a special energy called computation, which I'm going to refer to as learning juice, because what else would it be? To make the learning juice, we need the HPCA multi-block, which, no joke, is one of the most expensive machines we'll be making today next to the particle accelerator. Partly because it needs the uranium-rhodium dinaquatide oxide alloy, which requires the heat of tritium coils to be smelted. I've already established the expense of tritium, and we don't have any ZPM energy hatches, so we have to make the coils by hand inside of the ZPM assembler like plebeians. Instead of the 16 needed for an electric blast furnace, I make 24, enough to upgrade our alloy blast smelter since alloys is what we need. And while the coils get assembled, some of our HPCA parts arrive packaged nice and neat for us, and I won't make you wait as long as I had to begin building a big computer. It's actually a pretty cool concept for a multi-block because instead of just inputs and outputs, you have to balance computation generators that create heat and coolers to offset them. It's admittedly simplistic, but it's pretty fun. For now, I aim for a small amount of learning juice generation, but I don't know how to store it. Now, future DJojo knows you can't store learning juice, but past DJojo didn't, and wasted an astronomical amount of time and resources creating the data bank. It's not meant to store learning juice. So onto the research station, which I waste no time in queuing up the absolute mammoth craft for. And in no short order, we can boop our research station into existence right next to our HPCA to make cabling learning juice really easy. The first thing I want to use this guy for is actually the advanced data hatch to expand the storage of our assembly lines, so in goes a regular data hatch and a data orb, and it gets to learning. It doesn't take too long to finish, but I'll definitely want to upgrade it with more computers and coolers, so I do just that before popping in an LUV energy hatch to learn the recipe for the ever-coveted ZPM1. And God, what a good feeling is it to craft 2 ZPM hatches to begin our ZPMing journey. As always, the first one goes to the assemblers so that we can make the 0-point module coils automatically, and the other goes to the circuit assembler, because faster circuits is always better. And I really should stop blowing up my energy hatches, but I would still like to replace them. So with a few machines at ZPM tier, I queue an enormous craft of 32 energy hatches, 2 stacks of dragon steel wires, and a big 16 amp ZPM converter to power everything. And good God, is it a massive base upgrade. I even throw new EBF coils into the mix and make a new set of wire cutters out of Naquata alloy for faster than netherite mining speeds. And then the ZPMing of the auto-crafting line begins, each machine doubling in speed, and the polarizer gets its customary overclock up to ultra voltage. We can now make 4 ingots of Naquata alloy in 13 seconds, and our dragon steel craft has dropped from 800 seconds to 200. We're consuming so much power that we have to bypass limits on our flux points from now on, and the best part is we have the solar panels to support it. I pushed the freezer to UV power as well, and that marks all my machines at UV or ZPM, but they can yet go faster. We've now unlocked a new tier of parallel hatch, 64 times parallel. Stupidly high numbers. But we'll need better circuits. Circuits made of crystals. And for that, we'll need to move our autoclave into the clean room and get our hands on some exquisite emeralds and liquid europium. We can grow raw crystal processors from the emeralds and europium, and raw crystal processors can be infinitely duplicated from just 1. Each chip can be smashed into 9 chips, each of which grow into a full processor, and I decided to bulk up nicely on the fellows. Once I've got a happy amount, the processor's gonna dip in the EBF with emerald plates and helium to make engraved crystal chips. That gets a lime laser ring to turn into a crystal CPU, and then a blue laser ring to make a crystal sock. Yeah, that's right, we're skipping right to the sock. In order to make the crystal circuits, I find myself in need of the yttrium barium cuprate alloy, which needs card 14 on our ABS, but we're out of blocks to use for inputs. Luckily, we can cleverly route multiple pattern providers into the same non-nupal fluid hatch to save on some space and just barely eke out the inputs required to run crafting card 14. With that, the first of the crystal circuits is ours. We can make all the way up to the ZPM tier circuit, the supercomputer, because the mainframe is the first UV circuit and it requires research. We also need to double the research power than we currently have, so I need to upgrade the HPCA again. The upgrade is severe enough that we have to use advanced coolers who require cooling fluid to operate, but I didn't want to passive it, so I just crafted a lot of it at once. Don't do this, that was a bad idea and done by a professional idiot, because I don't make enough of it and most of my computers burn up and turn into empty HPCA blocks, so I have to craft them again. But the upside is I noticed palladium ingots are now smelting instantaneously inside of our EBF, which is super cool. I still don't passive the fluid though, I just make a lot more of it. And this time around it actually works. We researched the first of the UV circuits and are able to send their crafts into the system. With these amazing circuits in hand, we have the power to create unimaginable machinery, things that can draw complex chemicals out of the air itself. But all I want right now is that sweet, sweet parallel hatch. So I make sure to encode the data we need for ZPM tier sensors and emitters and queue the craft for 4 ultimate parallel hatches. And honestly, the craft took less than 30 minutes, which was way better than I was thinking it would, so big win for me. I used them to boost the machines in the clean room since those are usually the bottleneck, and now they work so fast that it takes less than a minute to make just one parallel hatch. Well, save for all the europium, because that's just going to be my eternal torment.